Good evening and welcome. I am Councillor Dennis Benningworth, Chairman of the Western Area Planning Committee. Members of the committee joining me this evening are Councillors Tony Vickers, who's the Vice Chairman, Adrian Abbs, Phil Barnett, Caroline Culver, Claire Rolls and Howard Wollaston. The following officers are attending to advise and support the meeting. We have the Team Leader of Western Area Planning Committee, Mr. Simon Till, Senior Planning Officer, Lydia Mather, Highways Officer, Paul Goddard, Legal Advisor, Sharon Armour, Gordon Oliver, our clerk, and Lizzie Reeves, the Zoom host. Before we start, I'd like to explain for the benefit of those watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present in the meeting area. Representatives making a presentation to the committee have been encouraged to do so remotely via Zoom, but those here in person are equally welcome. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube. Please can I ask that everyone present in the meeting area to make sure that they have their microphones placed in front of them and speak directly into it. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed by the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by our trained officers present. Please follow any instructions given by those officers. The assembly point is the Market Street multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance down the stairs will be assisted accordingly by the trained officers. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Good, thank you. Item one, then that's apologies. Mr. Oliver, do we have any apologies this evening, please?
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Clive Hooker and from Councillor Jeff Cant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oliver. That is noted. Item two, the minutes. We have no minutes available for approval at this evening's meeting. However, I can confirm the draft minutes for the meetings on the 3rd of November, the 24th of November, and the 15th of December have now been submitted to the planning officers for approval. The minutes for the meeting of the 12th of January have been delayed due to staff illness, but I've been assured that all outstanding minutes will be available at the next meeting. On to item 3 now, declarations of interest. Do members wish to make a declaration of interest on any items on tonight's agenda? Councillor Culver.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I'd like to declare an interest on this evening's agenda, please, because I'm the ward councillor for the application and I've been lobbied by many people, as you would imagine, but I will make a decision based on the information and debates this evening. Thank you.
Councillor Culver. Councillor Abbs.
Yes, just now I've been lightly lobbied on this subject, mainly inviting me out to do an inspection of the site, which is obviously in a secure location, but nothing much more than that.
Very good. Thank you very much. And that's everyone, is it? Just looking around the room. Thank you very much. Item 4. For those of you who are new to the meeting, I'll explain briefly how this works. Officers will present the application to the committee, after which the following groups might wish to make representations for a maximum of 5 minutes. They're the parish or town council representatives, then the objectors, supporters, applicant and or agent, and finally the ward member. Following this, the committee members will have the opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the speakers and officers. The committee will then debate the application and vote on the decision. Now, there's only one application on tonight's agenda, that being 20/01336/Outmadge, the Institute for Animal Health, High Street, Compton. Mrs. Mather will be making a presentation, and if you're good and ready, Mrs. Mather. Okay, a little technical issue there. Mrs. Mather is going to be replaced by Mr. Simon Till. And Mr. Till, then, if you're ready, please begin.
Chairman, members, if you'll bear with me, I'm afraid I have to perform something of a technical feat, juggling between my 2 screens in order to screen share the presentation. So I will endeavour to make that as seamless as possible. Can everyone see my presentation screen now?
We have the map there in front of us, Mr. Dole.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. The application was deferred by the committee on the 12th of January, pending the referendum on the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan, Thanks to the work and engagement of the local community, the document is now adopted and carries full weight alongside the other adopted planning policy documents. The agenda pack therefore has an addendum report at the front, which has a more detailed assessment of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan policies, as well as an additional information on land contamination and housing mix considerations, and outlines an amendment which has been fully consulted on to retain the buildings closest to the cricket ground. The original report is also enclosed in the pack, which outlines the assessment against the other adopted planning policies. The update sheet reiterates the previous, which with regard to policy CS15 on renewable energy and the highways information. Since then, there has been a query on the wording of the zero carbon strategy condition, and it's recommended that should the application be approved, the exact wording of that condition is delegated to officers in consultation with the chairman of the committee. Finally, on the update sheet, you'll note that we have been advised of a potential call-in by the Secretary of State should the committee resolve to grant planning permission. The following slides are submitted plans, and I will remind the committee of the proposal before you. The application is a hybrid application. It's partly full and partly for outline planning permission. The full planning application is for demolition of all but 3 of the buildings, remediation of land contamination and preliminary groundworks, and the change of use of land, including public open space and wildlife areas. The outline part of the application is for up to 160 dwellings, land for employment use, including that on that existing, and an area for future employment use. Access is for consideration, with all other matters reserved, which are landscaping, scale, layout and appearance, and include the housing mix. The application is before committee, where there have been more than 10 letters of objection. The designations and constraints on the site are that it's an allocated site for approximately 140 dwellings. The northern part of the site, referred to as Area A, is outside of the settlement boundary. It's partly within and adjacent to a conservation area to the south. It's within the North Wessex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty, within flood zones 2 and 3 to the south of the site, within an area of archaeological interest, and that there are public rights of way adjacent to the site. Demolition is proposed in 5 phases, colour-coded on the plan. The retained gatehouse near the main access is proposed for community use. The retained existing employment building will remain in its current use. The amendment, since the application was last considered by the committee, is to retain the building near the cricket ground, which is also proposed for community use. The demolition and land contamination remediation works are anticipated to take longer than would normally be expected at 18 months is the estimate. A construction management scheme condition is recommended, which would include hours of work and haulage routes. And there are parameter plans that subsequent reserve matters would need to comply with. Green infrastructure is shown on this plan. Area A to the north of the site has no development as a landscape buffer, wildlife habitat area and informal open space. The cricket ground would be retained along with all category A and B trees, and the landscaping, open space and habitat areas are shown to the boundaries, and there's a central green street. This slide shows the land use. The housing would be limited to within the yellow areas. Hang on a second, I might have missed a slide. Right, okay, sorry. The housing would be limited to within yellow areas. Area B would be developed to a lower density than Area C. Area E1 would be retained for employment use, and area A1 is proposed for employment land for future development. This slide shows the access. For the housing development, it would consist of use of the existing access off the High Street. The existing access for employment use would be retained off Churn Road, and footpaths are proposed around the perimeter of the building area, the central Green Street, and the reinstatement of a footpath crossing east to west across the site to link to the existing rights of way. This shows a map from the allocation policy in the housing site allocations DPD. The allocation policy expects comprehensive redevelopment of the sites within the blue area. The proposed parameter plans are considered to comply with the allocation policy map. Dwellings would be within the developable area, not within the landscape buffers of the site, not within the flood risk area or outside of the settlement boundary to the north. The site would retain and expand the existing employment use on the site. It would retain the cricket ground, and Area B would be developed to a lower density than Area C. This is the applicant's illustrative master plan. It wouldn't be an approved plan, but shows 160 houses and how those could be accommodated into the site within the parameters of the other plans. With regard to the principle of development, under the core strategy and housing site allocation policies, the site is within the settlement where there is a presumption in favour of residential development. It's within previously developed land, which is land identified as preferable for development. It's identified within the area of outstanding natural beauty policy as having potential to deliver a greater level of growth for a service village, and it's allocated for approximately 140 dwellings. Both the allocation policy and policy C2 of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan regarding development of this site are for approximately 140 dwellings. There is no definition within the policies of approximate. Officers don't consider that 20 dwellings, being 14 to 15% over 140, is beyond the scope of what would be reasonably meant by approximate. The primary factors when considering the number of houses proposed have been the landscape and highways impacts of the proposed development. Highways England were consulted and raised no objection with regard to their interest in the junction at East Ilsley onto the A34. The Highways officer will be able to provide more information, but in summary, in terms of traffic generation and traffic modelling, Highways are satisfied that the proposal is acceptable. The council's landscape consultant is of the view that up to 160 dwellings of mainly 2 stories in height can be accommodated within the parameter plans and have an acceptable impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty. There are some elements they would like reconsidered in a design code, which would be a document to be submitted at the reserve matters stage, and restrictions on the height of the dwellings to 2 stories with an element of 2.5 and single story. The design code recommended condition has been consulted on with the landscape consultant and would comply with policy C9 of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan. The proposal complies with the allocation policies and Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan Policy 2, where Area A to the north of the site would have no development with all buildings and hard standing removed, and an additional woodland belt, landscaping and informal recreation use on the lower level grassland. Where the specialist consultees on landscape and highways have not identified harm from the proposal, the principle of 160 dwellings is considered to be established. With regard to employment use of the site, the allocation policy allows for replacement of employment floor space and expects employment use as part of a mixed-use redevelopment of the site. The site area proposed for employment use would be a fifth of the developable area of the site. Policy C11 of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan requires the redevelopment to provide an enterprise hub preferable within an existing retained building. No new building is proposed for this. However, existing business uses would be retained. A land area would be set aside for future business use, which could include an enterprise hub, and either of the two retained buildings for community use could include a hub for start-up businesses. The aim of the policy C11 for local businesses to be provided for local businesses to be provided for on-site is therefore considered capable of being complied with within this outline planning application. With regard to the community uses of the site, the allocation policy includes community uses as part of the mixed-use redevelopment, with the cricket ground to be retained. It is proposed to retain the cricket ground, the gatehouse building, and the building by the cricket ground for community use, and that's the building to the south of the hostel site. The gatehouse building has limited existing parking associated with it, but this can be secured at reserve matters as part of the layout details. The supporting text of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan Policy C13 considers the building by the cricket ground to be suitable for the needs of the Compton preschool and for flexible business uses. The amendment to retain this building could therefore achieve this. The building would be offered in its current form and condition for sale and transfer, likely with a cascade mechanism being offered to the parish council, local businesses, etc., for the agreed periods of time to be secured in a Section 106 agreement. If at the end of that process a sale or transfer has not been agreed, the building would revert to being demolished as part of the redevelopment for housing. It is considered by officers that sufficient provision has been made for the employment and community uses as part of the proposal, and that the aims of the Compton NDP policies on this matters can be achieved. So this slide shows indicative density housing mix and affordable housing details. The main report sets out the illustrative master plan, which shows 160 dwellings of 23 dwellings per hectare in Area B and 26 dwellings per hectare in Area C. This complies with the allocation policy of a lower density in Area B and the supplementary planning documents for the site by not exceeding 30 dwellings per hectare. The illustrative housing mix demonstrates that it can in general comply with the council's policies and Compton NDP policy C7 for the majority of homes to be family-sized dwellings. 15% of the dwellings are to achieve building regulations requirements for accessible and adaptable dwellings, which is also part of policy C7. The housing mix will otherwise be a reserve matter. Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan Policy C6 expects the retention and conversion of the hostel buildings for 1 and 2 bedroom dwelling. These buildings are not proposed to be retained, but to form part of the redevelopment of the site for housing. Officers consider that the aim of the policy to provide smaller units can be achieved as part of the housing mix at reserved matters stage. Officers also consider that conversion would likely result in poorer quality housing not to modern standards compared to the higher building regulation standards and requirement for zero carbon strategy that a new residential development would have associated with it. While the proposal may not comply with the policy in terms of retention of the buildings, it would achieve the aim of smaller units through the redevelopment. Where the site is previously developed land, 30% of the dwellings are required to be affordable housing, which is proposed and would be secured by a Section 106 agreement. Part of the allocation policy and Compton NDP policy C5 expect a local lettings scheme. This is proposed as part of the development and would also be secured by planning obligation. The addendum report includes information on affordable housing with regard to demand by size of dwelling from the Compton NDP research from 2016, current information from the Housing Register and sales of shared ownership properties. Officers would consider this evidence when agreeing the housing mix for affordable houses as part of the Section 106. Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan C3 includes a requirement for an uplift on sustainable construction under building regulations, which is proposed to be secured by planning obligation. Compton NDP policy C4 encourages infrastructure for a local district heating network as part of the development of the site. This is not proposed. The supporting text refers to a 2016 report by the Committee for Climate Change. That report advises that it is most suitable in areas of high heat density, such as urban areas, to utilise waste heat, large-scale water heat pumps and hydrogen. The applicant is of the view that the district heating system for this site is not feasible due to its relatively modest scale by comparison to that sort of development. Officers consider that the proposal is not capable of complying with this NDP policy, but that the aim of the policy to decarbonise the development can be achieved through core strategy policy CS15. Advice has been received that zero carbon can be sought from major housing development under policy CS15, and a condition is proposed to secure this. The update sheet outlines that a query on the exact wording has been received and is under review. In terms of land contamination, the allocation policy includes a requirement that a contamination report and a preliminary risk assessment are undertaken. These have been submitted. There are contaminants on the site, and the Environment Agency notes previous activities including landfill, hydrocarbon storage, animal disposal and incineration, and research associated activities. The Environment Agency agrees with the submitted reports that further intrusive investigations are required where it's currently not possible under buildings, and that groundwater quality is to be established. They recommend conditions on a remediation strategy, verification report on remediation measures, and the avoidance of infiltration of surface water into the ground. The Council's Environmental Health Officer concurs with the Environment Agency in terms of their recommendations on land contamination and how it's to be addressed. The addendum report outlines the planning practice guidance that land contamination is also covered by the Environmental Protection Act, building regulations, and the environmental permitting regulations, which the Environment Agency oversee. The applicant holds permits with the Environment Agency and will need to go through a separate process with them regarding overseeing and treatment of contaminants from the site. Officers consider, with regard to the planning considerations of land contamination outlined in the addendum report, that the contamination condition of the site is understood and further investigations and remediation measures are required by condition. The proposed development is appropriate as a means of remediation where the site has been allocated for development, and the fact that the remediation works will be undertaken as part of the full application under the ownership of a government body, Homes England. The responsibility for securing a safe development rests with them as landowner and any subsequent developer, and is subject to the environmental permitting regime and conditions that your officers have recommended. In terms of flooding, the allocation policy requires a flood risk assessment and no development within the flood zones on the site or below a certain ground level. Policy C18 of the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan regarding flood risk requires it to be managed and reduced in line with core strategy policy CS16, and a condition on drainage measures in order to achieve this is recommended. The applicant undertook detailed flood modelling, which was submitted and consulted upon. As a result, the Environment Agency are now satisfied that with conditions on finished floor levels and no raising of existing ground levels on the site, that the flood risks of the development are acceptable. Thames Water has advised that there is currently insufficient capacity in the water and foul water infrastructure. They require a condition limiting development until sufficient infrastructure is provided. Thames Water have confirmed that they are in discussions with the applicant to provide the necessary infrastructure. Where Thames Water are a statutory undertaker, they have permitted development rights, so these works would not fall under this planning application. However, without these works in place, no further development on site would be able to continue under the condition advised by Thames Water. The technical matters regarding heritage, public open space, trees, biodiversity and green infrastructure are considered acceptable, and I won't therefore go into those details which are available within the report. In conclusion, on the Compton Neighbourhood Development Plan, officers consider that 17 policies of the Compton NDP are applicable to this application, and that it complies fully with 14 of them. Officers consider the aims of the 3 other policies can nevertheless be achieved. As a result, officers do not consider there to be direct harm arising from not fully complying with these policies. These are zero carbon from on-site renewables rather than a specific district heating network, local business use within the buildings proposed to be retained for the community uses or on the land area set aside for employment use rather than a dedicated enterprise hub, and provision of 1 and 2 bedroom homes at reserved matters as part of the overall redevelopment of the site rather than the conversion of the hostel buildings. As set out in the report, it is considered overall that these proposals comply with policies. Some adverse impacts have been identified with regard to the estimated 18-month period of works for demolition and its impact on residents, where works on site would be longer than normally expected, and the constraints of the site due to the previous land contamination and consequently land drainage. However, the benefits of the proposal are considered to outweigh these impacts, and in terms of both contamination and drainage, to address these impacts. In particular, the provision of housing on an allocated site for housing, including affordable housing, housing which is accessible and adaptable, remediation of the land contamination on site, economic benefits during and after construction, public open space and public rights of way, and net gain in biodiversity would be associated benefits of the redevelopment of the site. Overall, the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions and a legal agreement as set out in the report and update sheet, with the final wording of condition 32 for a zero carbon strategy to be delegated to officers in consultation with the chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Till. We're going to move across now to Mr. Goddard. Mr. Goddard, do you have any comments you'd like to make on this application, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can do. The
Mr. Goddard, section... you are inaudible at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
No.
Is that better?
It is indeed.
Right, okay. I don't know what happened there. My apologies. Good evening, everybody. The highway section of the committee report begins on page 79. As mentioned a few weeks ago, the proposal before you is access only, rather than internal layout of the site, which will be approved with further planning applications should this proposal be approved tonight. The main access for vehicles and for pedestrians is onto the high street using the existing access. There are some sightline details outstanding, but I am satisfied that adequate sightlines can more be provided there and a condition is secured to achieve this. As mentioned by Mr. Till, there's a further secondary access serving the existing industrial sites off of Churn Road, and there's also an emergency access onto Churn Road to avoid the site being an overlong cul-de-sac. There are also pedestrian routes, additional pedestrian routes onto Churn Road and Hockham Street. The transport assessment that was submitted was originally based on 250 dwellings. Only later was the proposal reduced to 160. And within the committee report on pages 80 and 81, you will see traffic generation projections for 250 and 160 before you. The existing use or previous uses of the site was a major employer in the area. And highways are more than certain that the proposal before you for 160 dwellings will not increase traffic from what would have been produced by the uses within the site. I'm aware that the proposal was allocated in the housing site allocation DPD with up to 140 dwellings. I do not consider that an additional 20 really makes much of a difference, particularly as the transport assessment was submitted on 250 dwellings. To assess the development of 250 dwellings, all the junctions, many of the junctions in the area, including the ones onto the A34 at East Ilsley, were modelled by reputable software following extensive traffic surveys taken in preparation of the planning application. No issues were revealed to traffic congestion in the area during peak travel times, including onto the A34, which is why Highways England also raised no objection. There will be some off-site highway works to improve pedestrian links, various pedestrian crossing points to be provided, and this is listed in your section 106 head of terms. Also to be provided is a contribution of £5,000 in order to monitor and an ongoing travel plan, which would be required for a development of this size. Mr. Till briefly mentioned construction, and this was also a concern when this proposal came to this committee a few weeks ago. There is a condition applied, condition 19, which gives details on the construction management plan. Much detail has already been submitted. We know, for instance, that it's expected during demolition and construction that there would be some 20 HGVs in and out per day. I don't know how long over a period of time that will take place. And there are still some details that we require to be able to sign off a construction management plan, which is why we provide it as a condition at this time for further work to continue and all make sure we have all the details. Other than that, Chairman, I've no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goddard. We're now going to move on to our speakers on tonight's application. Ms. Reeves, can I ask you to invite the representatives from Compton Parish Council into the meeting, please? We have Councillors Alison Strong, Rebecca Pinfold and Ian Tong joining us tonight. If you all be good enough, please, to unmute yourselves and reveal yourselves to the watching millions, that would be lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Good evening to you all, and thank you for joining us. As you know, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. After 4 minutes, I'll give you notice, should you require it, and then with 10 seconds to go, I'll say, and in conclusion, and then I'll ask you to stop. But when you're all ready, we'll start the clock. Hold on one moment, please. Mr. Oliver, do you have the clock?
Oh, yeah,
Was that okay?
I can do that.
Could you just make sure you can hear us before we start, please?
That is loud and clear.
Thank you.
Becca, would you be good enough to say something?
Yeah, I'm here.
That's great. And Ian, are you?
Sound check.
That's grand. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Oliver, if you're ready, we're ready for you whenever you are.
Okay, thank you. Compton Parish Council were encouraged by the members' previous vote that recognised the reputational importance of allowing the full completion of the NDP process. The NDP referendum concluded with 98% in favour, equating to the voice of 588 residents. The NDP is a formal foundation reference to enable the sympathetic evolution of the parish for future generations. Residents are now under the belief that the NDP must carry weight at both local authority level and at this committee, and there are points of reference from at least 2 High Court hearings where the judge cited where a planning application conflicts with a neighbourhood plan that has been brought into force, planning permission should not normally be granted. While the PC is appreciative of the approach Homes England has taken regarding some additional revisions, the development density remains unchanged. Planning officers have implied that the use of the word approximately within the NDP enables the development density to be increased by 20 units, disregarding the density calculations set out by the MPPF for the AONB, as well as the Council's own SPD and the NDP points 9.12 and 9.16. The calculation is 20 houses per hectare. The site is 7 hectares, equating to 140 houses. The proposal of 160 houses exceeds the overall house to hectare ratio across the parish today. The PC legal advice highlights contradictions within the officers' reports. The officers conclude that it is not major development and so avoids the exceptional circumstances test in the MPPF, but later assess the development as a major housing scheme. Members' decision based on these contradictions would be challengeable. It is apparent that the increase alone is unquestionably major development within the definition of the MPPF and therefore should be refused within the AONB. The new revision to retain previously used community buildings is appreciated. However, it must not be confused with offsetting against density. Community buildings should be seen as a fundamental enabler to link such a major development to the existing community and mitigate the risk of a bolt-on effect and therefore a divided community. The PC legal advice has stipulated that such buildings would be unacceptable without both development investment and a committed sum for future costs pre-handover to the community. The PC remained distressed by Thames Water additional and comprehensive submission of 11th February. Some parish residents today are experiencing hazardous environments due to the already crumbling infrastructure. 3 weeks ago, a household of 4 were instructed by Thames Water to limit toilet use for up to 120 hours with no escalation until sewerage re-entered the house. Even at 140 houses, 0 occupancy must be enforced until Thames Water infrastructure is secured to mitigate further detrimental environmental impact. Contamination was widely debated at last committee. However, Homes England have not yet disclosed the identified professional bodies who will endorse a management plan and who ultimately will be accountable body for the safety of the whole village, not just the site. This is an absolute requirement given the local knowledge of the infectious disease experimentation that has been conducted at the site over a period of decades. While at one time this may have seemed insignificant, we must learn from the global pandemic and not ignore the level of human death from an airborne virus released from a single source. The site today is used for police firearms practice and has 24-hour security. However, committee members were concerned that the site as it stands will be broken into by children. This is personal speculation by individuals who were
That's
not
1 minute,
resident
please.
within the community and does not correspond to planning principle. Although it does imply member concern for public safety, which should also relate to the enforcement of a robust and legally binding contamination accountability plan. The PC and 588 public voices request that you, as publicly voted members, will act upon their behalf, recalling that the introduction of the neighbourhood planning regime was to shift away from top-down planning that excluded local people and communities. In fact, the MPPF forward by the Minister Greg Clark states, dismantling the unaccountable regional apparatus and introducing neighbourhood planning addresses this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's pretty much 5 minutes. So well done with that. Looking around, we have some questions from members. If you'd be good enough to field those. I'm going to go first to Councillor Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Compton representatives. Firstly, obviously, congratulations on your excellent NDP referendum results. We're just starting ours in Newbury, and it's encouraging to know you ended up with such support. My questions, and I think much of what you were presenting to us just now are related to the changes in the policy, in the proposal resulting from the NDP. Firstly, you used the term major development. Were you, and I haven't quite got my head around the issue that you're talking about here, but are you talking about just the increase of 20 homes being in itself qualifying as major development? Because of course, it was always, the overall scheme was always obviously very much a major development. That's question number one. Secondly, number two, you talked about late contribution from Thames Water. I don't see anything, I think you said 11th of February. Could you elaborate perhaps a little bit on what worries you about that? I mean, I have no words of praise whatsoever for Thames Water, believe you me, but I'd like to know the specifics of what you're concerned about so that we can consider that. And thirdly, contamination. Obviously, the issue of local knowledge on matters which at the time they were live bits of research might well have been under quite a high level of classification. Are you confident that Homes England have had access to all the necessary documentation about what was going on the site? Because I can absolutely see your concerns about contamination. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the plan is that we will field the questions between us. Can we start with the contamination? I think because this is really important. So the site has been used for infectious diseases of animals and experimentation on animals over a period of decades, and it was highly classified. But and contrary to the belief of highways, the majority of workers at the site lived within the village. And in actual fact, the housing that's around within the village was built to accommodate those workers. So there is a lot of local knowledge. And we know locally, and even as a child growing up here in Compton, there were places within the village which we were encouraged not to play on because it had been used for the burial of animals that had been experimented on. And it's also true that we know that the elderly members of the parish have had telephone calls from government bodies asking them to help identify these areas of contamination on what might be there. It was so top secret at the time that it is difficult to believe that Homes England have all the necessary information. And that's I believe that Becca can add some more to that.
I think you've summed that up well. It's the local knowledge and the presumption that they probably don't know everything that's there. I don't think everything that there is documented.
So, and then let me just reiterate about Thames Water. So the household who were told to limit their toilet use for 120 hours, a household of 4 adults, live on a hill in the village, and their wastewater was unable to drain away. And they were told by Thames Water that even though it was almost unbearable to live in the house because of the smell, that this 120-hour SLA could not be escalated until the wastewater started to re-enter the property. So basically, try to find somewhere else to use your toilet, to go to toilet. As I said, this home is on a hill, so the wastewater couldn't even drain downhill. When Thames Water contractor came, they said, this is just basically what Compton is like. The infrastructure has been so underinvested that it is all just crumbling away. So I have to say, and I will admit that the fact is it was my household and it was my teenagers who were moaning that they couldn't use the toilet. It was the worst 120 hours so far as a parent. So that's a big concern. We know in the past when there's been flooding in the village that we've had issues, we've had drainage collapse, and in the last flood we had constant pumping day in, day out to remove the water. We know Thames Water is in very poor shape, so we do not support any occupancy on that on the site until Thames Water have had their infrastructure improved and signed off on. And your last point, I'm trying to remember what it's housing density? Yes. So
major development.
I think
colleagues.
Okay, so this is where Compton Parish Council have actually employed a planning solicitor, and he spoke for us last time, but as you can imagine, that's very expensive for us as a parish. So we have taken his advice. He has read the documentation. He is fully briefed. And what he is saying to us is, yes, brownfield site, yes, you've always known you're going to get some development on it, but you cannot forget that it is in the area of outstanding natural beauty. And those extra 20 houses just push us over and make it major development. And in some aspects of the reports that have come first round and now this round from the officers contradict, because sometimes they say it's not major development and then other times they are calling it a major scheme. And our solicitor is telling us that we should raise that to you because that's called and they use the word approximately. They're picking out that single word out of a huge document that's taken many hours of work. They're picking a single word, the word approximately, and saying, okay, it doesn't matter because it just says approximately. Our solicitor tells us that's called a judgment call by the officers, and that you as members do not have to support that judgment call. And in actual fact, because there are so many contradictions in the paperwork our solicitor has read from the officers, he tells us that it would be challengeable. That means we could take that forward and challenge you further to say that it is major development and it's in the area of outstanding natural beauty. We are just about acceptance of the 140. That's what all our work has been about all the work we put in with the supplementary planning document first, and then all of the work that's been with the NDP. It's been about securing the right level of density, and that is, in our belief, 140.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Vickers,
Okay.
does that satisfy you? Thank you. I've got Councillor Culver next.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, councillors, for coming along to speak this evening. I've just got one question. Policy C13 of the NDP regarding the Piglets Day Nursery and the Pickled Pig Complex. In the NDP, it says that those facilities should be retained, renovated and enhanced. But in the agenda pack this evening, it says that they would be offered up to the community to buy. As parish councillors, would you have sufficient facilities to buy that facility, bearing in mind that the NDP said or seemed to say that it would be handed over, renovated and ready for use?
Absolutely not. We do not. We're not a cash-rich parish council. We have one major activity currently, which is to find and to build a new burial ground, which will take all of the funds that we have currently in our bank account. If we don't deliver a burial ground shortly, we've got 3 spaces left in our churchyard, we're in trouble. There is no other funds for the purchasing of community buildings.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. I've got Councillor Abbs next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just coming back to the toxicity discussion that we're having. Sorry, thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I forgot to say that at the beginning. But toxic matters I've written down here. I believe I've picked up something in one of the letters from a gentleman called Paul Sopp on the 21st of January, which started to talk about anthrax. Is that the type of toxic contamination that I should be concerned about?
I think the problem is that's what we expect. We expect it to be the worst because we know that the experiments were so important to the government at the time, and it was so highly classified. As a village and as parish, our expectation is that what they were working on was highly toxic. You know, we know it was things like BSC. We know, we know then, like I think in foot and mouth, in the first round of foot and mouth was always investigated there. Rebecca, I think you've got a few more. You're a bit more scientific than I am on this, so
it's okay.
So yeah, this is the type of thing. It is pretty serious. Yeah, definitely. You know.
Okay, can I move on to the second part of, having established that it's very serious stuff that we're considering here. You talked about local knowledge, and government bodies are talking to you about various things where the bodies are buried, I guess, was part of what you said, I think. How does that link into the sampling that was done on the site that was meant to give this site the all clear in your minds?
So my understanding of the sampling has been around some of the perimeter of some of the buildings. But you've got to remember that the site has developed considerably over many decades. So some of the original experimentation would not have had the same level of rules and regulation around its waste disposal as we would expect today. So I think that there is really no telling where they might find something while they do the
sorry, Councillor.
I'm not sure. What I've heard from, personally not seen where they did the testing, but what I have heard from people who live near and witness some of the testing, it was not deep dive testing, it was shallow digging testing, and the rest was desktop. So
what I was trying to get at is, was there any consultation done with the local knowledge as to where the sampling should be done, or most likely should be done? Or was it just someone turned up, did 50 samples, what they thought was correct, and moved off again?
It is not my belief that they consulted anybody about necessarily where they should go, because a lot of, the people that they need to consult are either dead, and that is a fair. Many of the scientists who work there are now dead. A lot of the people who work there are now in their 80s within the village, 70s and 80s, and, can't recall.
Okay.
So
you've kind of answered to satisfy myself as to a concern I had. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. I've got Councillor Barnett next, please.
Chairman, I'll try not to go into debate, so I might make an observation, but really I'd like to couple questions of Councillor Strong. You were suggesting that no proper organisation had been identified to oversee, and obviously it's a theme of the last two speakers, on the contamination issue. I mean, your thoughts on any particular organisation, because clearly from what you're suggesting, it's a biological and possibly radiological issue. And obviously one would like to know if there is radionuclides present or even contaminated objects of whatever objects they are. Have you sort of got any particular body in mind that you feel as a professional body that would be appropriate to undertake such a work?
So I don't know who the bodies are, and I am sure there are bodies in the government that do this. But my point, and why I'm trying to make this point, is God forbid on the day the forklift goes through something and the village gets shut down. And please don't laugh, because this recently happened about 5 years ago. Somebody dug something up in their garden that had come from the site, and the village got closed down. There were police everywhere. The point is, we don't know who is going to be accountable. And as a village and as a parish council, we need a named person or body who will be responsible for the safety and for even an evacuation plan for a whole village and 2 schools. And we don't have that today. And, we've got Homes England have said that, or today, Simon Tiller has said Homes England will be responsible. But who in Homes England? Because in actual fact, we're already on our 3rd contact at Homes England in the last 2 years. So who is it, and who are they talking to? I mean, I don't know.
Councillor Barnett, that might be a question that is better answered by our officers when we go to.
But what I'm saying is, as a parish councillor, I want an evacuation plan for this village, and I want to know who I'm calling. Who's got the red phone in government that I'm phoning to get it sorted. That is, what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barnett, is there anything further?
Chairman, I think I would pursue the matter with other groups and possibly the presenter of the case in a few minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I've got Councillor Williston next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, congratulations on getting your NDP through. I'm the Lambourne Warden member, and we're going through the same process at the moment. So I admire you for getting through it. Clearly, you will then benefit from 25% of all SIL money. So will that not go towards the costs of any refurbishment of the building you mentioned?
Potentially it could, but there are other things in this village that we're a service village, and there's a lot of underinvestment. So it's not just about investing in that particular area. The rest of the village needs some investment too. So, we would need to have to work out how that money would be spent. And it would seem, I just don't think it seems fair that the money that comes from the site then has to be used for the community buildings that will bridge the gap between the site and the existing community. That doesn't seem fair that all of that money should go there. That there needs to be some investment across the rest of the parish as well. So my feeling is that you and Simon Tiller already said in his statement that one of the reasons they couldn't keep the hostels was because it wouldn't be in a state that would be acceptable today. Those hostels built around the same time of the buildings that they are suggesting and offering up to us as a community, and all of those buildings have been unoccupied for the same level of time. So the state of the buildings that we're talking about are not going to be acceptable. So day one of us giving them, even if we don't have to pay for them, we've got an unusable building, and then we then as a parish have got to do all of that work to get it into a usable state, and that could take a long time. It could take years. And is that fair on the village when a big community, 160 houses are being built?
That's strong. Thank you. Councillor Wilson, does that satisfy you?
Well, it's an answer. Thank you,
It's an
Chairman.
answer.
Can I raise one other point as well?
Please do.
Having walked around the site at the last site inspection, I have said that was my village. I would want to see something done with that because it's an eyesore. I agree with you that we've got contamination issues. And if I wanted anybody to do it, it would be a government-backed body rather than a speculative developer. Do you have any views on that?
Well, I think the whole village wants to see something done. I mean, it's very clear in the NDP, we don't want to see it rot away. For sure, we want something. But the point of doing the NDP was to make sure that we do sympathetic evolution of this village. And cramming 160 houses on a site is not sympathetic evolution of a village. The whole point is to do something that actually builds the community and enhances the community. So yes, we want something done. We don't want to see this waste, but we want a good mix of housing at the right ratio. And we want a good mix of some employment opportunity because we've lost all that employment opportunity. So this is not about us saying, don't build. This is about us saying, build something that is right for this parish. And then something that future generations can go on to enjoy, not just throw 160 houses on there because you've got a decontamination bill. That's the point we're raising here.
Thank you very much. Councillor,
Thank you.
well done. I'm looking around and I see no more hands. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. And if I can just add, before you go, just add my congratulations on your tremendous effort. I know it was a labour of love, and I'm delighted for you all that you got to the very healthy response that you did. So
could I just say that all of you who are actually doing this process now, you cannot do it without good volunteers who are prepared to give up an immense amount of time, because it wasn't just the parish council. In actual fact, the parish council, you know, we handed it over to the volunteers of our village and they have done an amazing job, and that's what you will need to get it through. So
well,
thank you.
Thank you for those wise words, and thank you again for your attendance this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Reeves, if you'd be kind enough to escort them back to the waiting room. And in turn, invite our applicant and agent, Messrs. Harris, Green and Strike, who will be joining us momentarily. Gentlemen, are you with us? If you'd be good enough to unmute yourselves and start your videos, please. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Brilliant.
Mr. Harris, thank you very much.
So it was a little slow coming through, so I'm sure the others are joining.
Thank you. When you're both good and ready, if you could unmute yourselves and start your videos. Mr. Strike, I don't know if we can hear you. Can you try that again, please?
Yes. Evening, can you hear me now?
Is that you, Mr. Green?
I think that's me, Mr. Strike.
It is indeed, yeah. Mr. Green, can we hear you, please?
Can you hear me, Chairman?
I can. We can't see you, but...
yes, I'm having problems with my video starting for some reason.
Richard, I think it's, sorry, Chair. Richard, I think it's because your video's on our Teams internal channel. Too many forms of video conferencing, aren't there?
Would it be possible to turn that off and then?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
That's on now. Apologies for that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. You're more than aware how this works. You've got 5 minutes to address the committee. After 4 minutes, I'll give you notice, should you require it, and then with 10 seconds to go, I will say, and in conclusion, then I'll ask you to stop. Gentlemen, when you're ready, the time will start now.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee, for giving us the opportunity again tonight to talk to you. I'm not going to speak for long. I would like Richard to speak to most of our time. However, anticipating questions and the previous discussion, I would like to, at this point, reference the officer's report, paragraph 4.42 through 4.47, which is very clear on the matter of contaminated land, citing the planning practice guidance, together with condition 18, which clearly refers to the Environment Agency and the environmental permitting regulations that sit beneath the Environmental Protection Act 1990, which are essentially answering many of the questions from the last round. I would also reiterate all of our previous comments and commitment in the application pack relating to design, Homes England's commitment to working with the parish and the community, and to ensure that we work as good neighbours and deliver a good project. But I would like to let Richard speak to the majority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few points I would like to raise to reinforce the points there that Homes England have raised. First thing to say is that an overarching objective of the application is to deliver a green infrastructure-led response that embeds principles of building for a healthy life with the following long-term positive benefits for Compton: reuse of brownfield land, including removal of redundant buildings and full remediation of contaminated land, thereby bringing the site back into beneficial use. The remediation is backed up by an intrusive survey of the site that will be reviewed and tested throughout the demolition process. It is important to emphasise that the site must be fully remediated in order to respond to house builder market requirements. The application is for up to 160 homes, provided in a mix that will meet local and West Berkshire needs for a range of 2 to 5 bedroom properties. We reiterate the comments regarding the 14 to 15% increase beyond the 140 stipulated in the DPD and the neighbourhood plan. However, all of the houses are proposed within the identified developable area of the application policy, and the increase of 20 is within the 1 to 25 additional houses identified by the majority of respondents in the 2018 NDP, and is only approximately beyond the 140. As such, 160 dwellings is considered acceptable under policy. In addition, the benefits in terms of additional choice and a fully compliant affordable housing provision for the village should also be noted. Wider community benefits include the retention of former Pickled Pig and Piglet Stay Nursery, the cricket pitch, and former Gaze House, as noted previously. In addition, the scheme will provide contributions to social infrastructure and public transport and maintains employment on the site with the potential for more in the future. A transport assessment has been submitted for the application and includes construction management plans for both demolition and construction phases. There have been no objections to the proposals provided in the TA. No development will take place in the floodplain, and the new development will incorporate a sustainable drainage network to avoid risk of flooding. These aspects were informed by an extensive flood risk assessment and hydrology model of the River Pang. Redevelopment of the site will reduce visual impact on the wider A and B compared to existing buildings and structures. There will be no development in the northernmost area, which will be given over to Managed Wildlife and Habitat Zone. The proposed landscape provides a protective buffer to open countryside.
Right, there's 1 minute, please.
Okay, and has support of the West Berkshire Landscape Officer. Wildlife and habitat areas will be enhanced and integrated with further opportunities for interpretation and community learning. There will be a net increase of managed green infrastructure and associated BNG benefit of approximately 85.5%. Strong community links and healthy lifestyles will be encouraged through low-speed streets, place-based and pedestrian and cycle links. The removal of hard boundaries and the reinstatement of the public rights-of-way will significantly improve accessibility for existing and new residents. Overall, the redevelopment will make a positive contribution to the village
And in conclusion,
for long-term sustainability of Compton. Thank you.
another well-timed round. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go to questions now from councillors, and I've got Councillor Culver first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming along this evening, gentlemen, and for your patience, having gone through this before. I've just got a couple of questions. You, I believe, cited paragraph 4.43 of tonight's pack, which says, with regard to outline applications, the National Planning Practice Guidance states that among other matters, considerations include that the contaminated condition of the site is understood. Would you accept that we do not completely understand the contaminated condition of the site? Because as previous speakers have said, there aren't good records of what has happened on the site historically. Many people who know what happened are in fact dead, and we do not know what is buried under the existing buildings. Do you accept that we don't have a full picture of the contamination at this point in time? And also, whilst we're grateful that you've made a concession about the pickled pig building, in my view, it would have been good at this point if you could also have acknowledged members' concerns about the lack of one-bed housing. So whilst I accept that this is a matter for a further planning application, I think in good faith you could have indicated your willingness to provide that, bearing in mind that a lot of the background documentation for the NDP clearly states that local housing need includes one-bed properties, particularly affordable one-bed properties.
Thank you. Could I take the one-bed point first? I mean, I would reiterate what your officers have said, which is quite clearly that for the housing element of this, it is an outline application. Mix is not a matter that's in front of the committee tonight. It's a reserved matter which a developer, once Homes England have chosen a preferred developer, would submit a reserved matters application and move it forward. In terms of how we've presented Mix on drawings, obviously they are indicative. It's an indicative layout. You may recall that the 185 home scheme, because we obviously have been working through with officers and seeking to work through with the community to taper that down. The 185 scheme did include some one-bed homes, one-bed flats. They were in a form of building which, at the time, the landscape officer was not entirely comfortable with. However, they are well within the ability of the site to accommodate that. We didn't move that forward through the 160 scheme, partly because just the nature of the way the scheme evolved in our minds at that point, in the context of it being an illustrative master plan, illustrative, not fixed, indicative, not to be conditioned at this time. So I think I take the point. I really do take the point. I would reiterate Simon, Mr. Till's point earlier, which is that the current one-bed homes that are on the site, the hostel building, aren't unsuitable for the reasons that Councillor Strong suggested, which is related to the contamination of the site. They're unsuitable in our minds because of the environmental performance of those structures. And we are very mindful, as we've seen, as I hope you've seen through the work that we've done, we're very mindful of trying to move this development in the direction of your aspiration, which is towards a net zero set of homes. So I think it would fly in the face of both our aspirations as Homes England to encourage that kind of development, and your own neighbourhood development plan aspirations to go to net zero, if we were to retain some buildings that are quite clearly of a low environmental standard. And I think it would do a significant disservice to those potential future occupants to have some residents potentially through an affordable housing RP in properties that are less environmentally beneficial than others that are new build. In effect, that would be akin to the, we move towards a pepper potting world with affordable housing, forgive me a slight tangent, because we wanted to ensure that there was no differentiation between market and affordable, because why should there be? And I fear that we'd be straying into there. So hopefully that answers your question. I mean, I did reiterate at the last committee, and I appreciate that was in front of some other members, but we will be, project manager for the site, will be responsible for signing off the reserve matters application. So quite frankly, if we colleagues aren't comfortable with the design, with the mix, any aspect of it, we won't sign it off and it won't be submitted. So that's that commitment which I've given you, Councillor Culver, at the Parish Council meeting a couple of weeks ago, and Councillor Strong and residents on a number of occasions. Turning to the contamination point, yep, 4.43 does draw upon the planning practice guidance, and it talks, I think the 4.43 talks about the contaminated condition of the site is understood. I'm not going to sit here tonight and get into a discussion about what members of the public might or might not know. I would say, as Richard said in his presentation, and he'll be able to talk to this as well in a moment perhaps, but we have a ground investigation, we have a site investigation survey, we have a significant package of previous information from the previous occupiers, which, with all due respect, is a package of information that isn't in the public domain, shouldn't be in the public domain at this stage, and that informed our due diligence of the site when it was transferred to us by what is now the BASE, yes, forget the environment and industrial strategy, something like that. When it was transferred to us, and we have that background pack, and that background pack is what informs the environmental permit that we hold with the Environment Agency. And I think that goes to one of the questions that was in the previous round of presentations, which, forgive me, I think it was Councillor Abbs, but forgive me if it was Councillor Barnett, because I think my notes might have gone a bit askew. But somebody asked, who should the relevant body be? It's not, no disrespect, it's not for this committee, it's not for me to determine who that body is. It's already been established. It's the Environment Agency. We have an act, that's the Environmental Protection Act 1990, with permitting regulations that sit underneath it. The Environment Agency control all of these matters.
Mr. Harris, we're sort of veering away from the...
We are, so apologies, Chair.
Councillor Vickers, do you want to... I'm sorry, Councillor Carr, I do apologise.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, for your responses. And just point of information, I wasn't at a parish council 2 weeks ago where I heard a presentation from you, so that must have been someone else. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Colvin. Apologies there. I do apologise for that. Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. I just have two questions, if I may. First of all, you referred to the 2018 NDP in respect of the additional 20 houses. I'm wondering why you're referring to that and not the current one, which we actually voted to adjourn the last meeting so that we could seriously consider and obviously have great weight to the current NDP. So I just want to ask why you're referring to the 2018 one. Secondly, could you just clarify exactly, because I'm not entirely clear on the community asset point, exactly what will be made available to the community and in what state and what that looks like, if you may. Thank you.
Yeah, I won't seek to speak for Richard necessarily, but the 2018 it was actually the NDP survey, so it was part of the evidence base that was being worked up, and it's for your reference, paragraph 9.15 of the adopted plan refers to that survey, and it draws down the 140 homes that were already allocated at that point within the West Berkshire site allocations DPD. So that's what framed the approximately 140. But the survey discussed that 191 of the 414 returns, brackets, the vast majority, stated 1 to 25 homes, and 61 of 414 stated 26 to 50 homes. So that, sorry, Richard, I am speaking for you here, but it basically draws on,
yes,
draws on the officer's comments.
It was reiterating the comments made by the officer, and it relates to what individuals would deem to be acceptable as a number beyond 140, and it also therefore refers to the approximate figure word that's been debated this evening around what is acceptable beyond 140 units.
And Councillor Rolls, you were mentioning the assets. You want to clarify?
So the asset. I think the last committee was very clear that there was an expectation that the community facilities that we were offering at that time were not good enough, and I left that note very clear that was the case. With colleagues, we considered what was the most appropriate way forward. Was it the hostel site, for instance? Was it a different building? I think the view that we took was that the former pickled pig and piglets nursery, I think that's the correct name for it, is actually a building that is in a reasonably good state of repair, to go to one of the previous comments in the last discussion. It arguably is a building that probably doesn't require a significant amount of upgrading to be used by the community. So we wanted to be in a position where we could remove that from the proposed demolition and provide it as an option for an asset. However, having said that, and I appreciate the comments that were made at the parish council meeting a few weeks back and by the parish tonight, I do appreciate the frustration. However, the flip side is that Homes England aren't a shareholder-led housing developer. We are the government's housing accelerator. We are in the business of levelling up, providing regeneration on brownfield sites such as this, clearing up contaminated sites such as this, and without future development, this site can't be remediated. We're not necessarily, frustrating as it may be, in the world of paying for new community facilities. We are, however, in a position in this instance to be able to enter into discussions as to how we might be able to transfer that. We can't move as quickly as we could have done.
Does that,
can I just have a supplemental, because this is a really important point, Chairman. So what you're saying is that you're going to talk to the community about potentially transferring that asset, but the state of the asset might not be brought up to whatever standards required so that it can be used, as in you're not going to commit to that.
Short answer, I can't commit to that tonight because that's not within my pay grade.
Thank you.
Okay.
But we'll enter a discussion, certainly.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rolls, are you done there?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Barnett, please.
Right, through you, Chairman. Firstly, Mr. Harris, I think the point you were making in relationship to the Environment Agency, and when I was questioning Councillor Strong, I was trying to establish whether she might well be aware of any specific type of organisation that would be the contractor and not actually the overseer. So I think that's probably where the confusion, where you were perhaps thinking we were talking about the Environment Agency, and I was trying to establish whether she thought there was a professional body that would actually carry it out. But I'm obviously aware also it would be subject to a proper evaluation and a contracting basis of before anybody undertook that work. I'll try not to sort of go over the points which I raised last time around, but clearly from what you were saying, you got some information in relationship whether it was biological, radiological, or combination of both, and perhaps other substances which could well be contaminated within the land. Is that information ever going to be made available to anybody other than at the end of the actual operation of decontaminating the site? And also, to what level are you expecting the contamination to actually fed into the structure of the subsoil, and so what sort of depth were you anticipating the decontamination work would go down to?
Thank you, Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, and thank you for clarifying the nature of your previous question. And if I can, the answer to that is that we already have a a project management organisation, multinational project management, Arcadis, are acting for us. They have remediation specialists. They have devised the specification for the works and helped us go out to tender to get into a place where we can contract a specialist. We haven't got that signed off yet. We have a preferred bidder. Obviously, I can't speak any more openly than that, but we have a party that we are satisfied would be able to undertake the work properly. In terms of the information, I can't say for certain, to be honest, because it's not my specific area. There is, as I said earlier, there is some information available, site investigation and the GI work, and there will be other work as part of the environmental permitting. But I would stress that whilst it's understandably a significant concern, the permitting regs are there to ensure that the works are delivered properly, and anything that is found is dealt with and disposed of correctly. To go to your question about depth of potential contaminants in soils, the work needed to be done will be done, no matter what needs to be done, because it is clear to us that we won't be able to market the site to a developer and for them to be able to sell homes in simple terms, and for those occupiers to mortgage homes unless it is a safe site. So that's why we are involved now. And it goes to Councillor Wollaston's point earlier about government organisation being involved. That's why we are involved, and it's not a volume house builder. I appreciate that doesn't fully answer your question, but I'm not really in a position tonight to be able to do that.
Councillor Barnett, are you?
Chairman, can I just make an observation, because I think it's quite important from a...
It's a question of clarification.
Yeah, a point of clarification. It's really from a transparency point of view. The reason why I was asking about the contractors, I do work or have done work for some demolition contractors that are involved in work associated with the contamination of land, and I'm just hoping that any of these, and the preferred bidder has just been mentioned, there is one, but the name obviously is not going to be declared. But I just want to make sure that if it is a case that it ends up it's a contractor which I've been associated with, will that sort of put me in a difficult position at a later stage regarding voting?
Well, I think that's probably something we need to discuss later in terms of your observations, but you don't know who the potential bidder is. So you're not making any decision at the moment based on any knowledge of who the bidder is.
Chairman, the name of the bidder was mentioned. It was Arcadis, was it not?
No, that's the person that's been employed, I thought, to, yeah.
Chair, if I may, can I clarify that?
Please do, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Chair. So for absolute clarity, Arcadis are appointed by Homes England as our project managers. They're appointed to support us in refining the scope of the works and tendering those works, and then they will project manage those works. They are not delivering the works. Okay. That's a contractor that went out to open tender. So Councillor Barnett, this may help you, I don't know, but it was out for open tender. A number of parties submitted bids. We have selected a preferred bidder. I have internal approval to appoint them. I haven't yet appointed them because without planning, I have no need to appoint them.
Thank you for clearing that up. I think Councillor Barnett, from Mrs. Armour's point of view.
Yeah, I think, I mean, unless you know one of the people that have put a bid in, so I think then you have no knowledge of who it may be. So you're not making a decision in their favour or indeed against them.
Thank you, Mrs. Armour. I'm going to go now to Councillor Vickers, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, gentlemen, more than half a century ago, my first job as a graduate was site preparation on contaminated sites for housing. So I have a great interest in this application, as you can imagine. But the law has tightened up a lot in the last 55 years. My questions are in this area. By saving the Pickle Pig building, you've actually helped with the zero carbon, because there's embedded carbon in buildings. And my question is, has that been factored into your calculations? It's not just embedded carbon, but it costs money to demolish buildings. And, you know, that might be factored into the discussions with the parish council on the matter of bringing the building up to a standard that they can accept it. I mean, just by comparison, on a very big site, much bigger site than this in my own ward, the developer has offered to build and hand over the community building for £1, unilateral undertaking. So, you know, it can be done. I hear what you say about it not being part of your remit as Homes England, but as Homes England carrying the whole of this cost, you will have saved money by not demolishing that building, will you not? And couldn't that be factored in? Moving on to an adjacent building, the hostel, which carries minor weight, adverse weight in the decision we're being asked to play. Again, it's, you know, if you preserve that building, you have saved money by not having to demolish it and not even having to, I imagine it's the part of the site that is least likely to be contaminated. So you've saved a considerable amount of money. I'm not entirely happy. I know it's not a particularly attractive building, but to keep any building which is part of the history of an area has some value.
Specific question, Councillor.
So the question is, did you factor in the cost saving that could have been made by preserving that building and converting it? I walk past a building every day. I'm fascinated to see it an old building which had no insulation being converted to modern standards for 6 small 1-bed flats. So I would have liked to have seen that hostel preserved. And my other question is, looking at your 18-month demolition plan and factoring in that in that 18 months, you've also got to do building recording and all the decontamination work, which is bound to have to be done very carefully. Isn't that a rather ambitious timescale? And could you reassure us, it's the question I put to the parish council representatives, reassure us that you've done all the desk research and all the investigation that you possibly could have done about what might have been happening on that site, including trying to find the people that work there and interview them? Because, you know, there is a huge risk from what I'm hearing, word of mouth from the residents.
Okay, so who'd like to field those 2 questions from Councillor Vickers, please?
On the point about, thank you, Councillor Vickers, thank you, Chair. On the point about the embedded carbon and the cost, I absolutely agree with you that if there's an ability to reuse building, we should reuse it. And as I said earlier, in response to other councillors, we went away from the last committee and we're clear in our minds that we needed to provide a community facility. We considered, should we propose a new building or should we propose retention in the existing? And we went for the latter because I think that is the right thing to do. And it's that building that was chosen because of the location adjacent to the cricket pitch and the front of the site and the relatively good state of repair. Your reference to another site and developers unilaterally providing and moving across for £1. Yeah, it happens. It happens an awful lot. I'm not going to say tonight that won't happen. I just can't say tonight that it will, because it's been a little over 3 weeks since we last met at committee. And as you'll appreciate, it takes a little more than 3 weeks to get through a government procurement process. That's why the officer's report is absolutely right in talking about the negotiation and the fact that if planning is granted tonight and the section 106 includes a mechanism, we'll work through that process to find a way that works, if at all possible. So I'm not saying no and I'm not saying yes. I'm saying let's talk about it if we move through. Your point relating to the 18-month demolition program, that was the estimate from Arcadis, our project managers. It was put out to market. That was their estimated work program. A number of the bids were significantly shorter than that. Without divulging anything, which I can't, I don't think I'm divulging anything here. The bids that we saw as being the most robust were those that were closest to the circa 18 months. I can't say that hand on heart that it will take exactly 18 months because none of us can do that, but that is what we are expecting it to take. and the construction management plans and all of the things that control how that works. We'll take that into account and move things
Very
forward.
much. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Vickers, are you done there for the moment? Thank you very much. I move on to Councillor Williston, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to be absolutely clear how the process works. My understanding is that Homes England are a government body who take these sort of sites and they make them put them into a state where they are developable. And they then sell the sites off to house builders to then presumably submit a detailed planning application, which could well include, I imagine, a contribution to the pickled pig. My understanding is that because it's a government body that's doing this work, effectively, within reason, cost is not an issue. It has to be done. Am I right on that? Am I going off the rails?
I think in summary, Councillor Williston, you know exactly how we operate and how we work. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're a government organisation, so we sit within the Department for Levelling Up. We sit under it. We own sites. We get them to a state where, whether it's enabling infrastructure, highways, for example, or in this case, remediation, because nobody else will be able to purchase this site and deliver this package of remediation. It's been made very clear to us that the market is not interested. We will undertake that work. To some extent, it costs what it costs. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And then we dispose of the site to a developer who will submit a reserve matters application or a full planning application. And as you say, they may well choose to make contributions towards the pickled pig or other community assets. And that application would come in front of committee and be determined in the same way as any other. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We are there to unlock and enable brownfield regeneration.
Thank you very much.
Can
Williston,
I have one further very
please
brief
do,
question?
yes.
I'm just curious to why you stuck with the 160 unit scheme when it's quite clear from the development plan that the local population wants 140. Is it critical to get that extra 20 to make it viable?
It's not a viability argument. We haven't suggested 160 is viability based. Our original application for 250 was because we felt at that time that was what was capable of being delivered on the site. We heard very loudly and very clearly that was unacceptable to the community and to officers. So we moved out of area A at the top. That got us to 185, which we felt was within planning and technical and environmental impact issues. You know, you've heard from Highways Officer tonight has said that. We thought was acceptable. 185 didn't work for your landscape officer. So we worked internally with Richard's design team and Jim on the planning side. We worked to understand what we thought was deliverable. We ended up at 160 rather than 140. I'm feeling 140 would have been a happier evening potentially, but 160 in part because I wanted to make sure that we were making the best use of brownfield land, which is what the NPPF says to do. Within constraints, and I think we've done that. I'm a town planner and I consider that is the right thing to do. The other side of 160 is that every additional home has an additional percentage of affordable housing attached to it. And whilst West Berks have a housing supply, you do have a severe affordable housing shortage. And you are based in a very expensive part of the world. And I think as much affordable housing as we could provide on that site, the better. And 160 allowed us to provide a few more affordable housing units, and that can only be a good thing in my mind.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And finally, Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, I thought Councillor Williston had just about asked every question I was going to ask them, but I've managed to think of another one, so that's good news, isn't it? Where he went was exactly where I was going, to establish essentially what you're there to do as a body, which is to basically clean up the land. I didn't hear anywhere that it's your job to make as much profit as possible for a house developer. So I'm really stuck as to why, given the various bits and bobs that gave you a maximum number to go with. We think this is this is a reasonable number to go for. Consistently, you've decided to push more on it. That doesn't seem to gel very well with me. It just seems to, and I'm really trying. I guess you semi-answered it already, but you've gone on to talk about and you slipped in the affordability argument there. But as Councillor Culver mentioned earlier, there's no mention of one bed here either. So I'm struggling to how is the real remit behind you to clean the land up and get it developed, or is it to actually and work with the local bodies like the parish council, or is it in fact to we've got to do it, money is there to do it, but we actually want to minimize the money that we're spending on doing it by therefore putting as many houses as we can on it?
No.
Who'd like to take that one, please?
In short, Councillor, thank you, Chair. In short, no is the answer to your last question. As I said to Councillor Wollaston, I believe that the site can accommodate 160. That does have a benefit from an affordable housing perspective. We are the government's housing accelerator. We're there to deliver homes and affordable homes, and therefore, if I'm in a position on a site that we manage to sensitively deliver additional housing, then I think that is the right thing to do.
Okay, Mr. Holmes, then let me ask the question slightly different. If you had been told absolutely no more than 140, is that what would you have come forward with?
I don't really understand the question, to be honest.
Well, no, okay.
In what form, if I may ask a question to clarify, in what form would I have been told no more than 140?
Well, you're given a guideline from the local plan as to what was perceived as the right number for the site, and you've constantly gone over it rather than listen to what was said from local people. So.
I think the policy is very clear that it's approximately 140. That's the policy in the West Berks plan.
It's okay. We'll debate it later. You're relying on the word approximate. That's fine. That's fine.
For debate, Councillor Ramsey. Thank you very much. Looking around the room, no further hands. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
And thank you very much. If I could ask you please to escort them, gentlemen, back to the waiting room. And when they're safely ensconced, I will turn to our ward member this evening, Councillor Caroline Culver.
Chairman, want to let me know when the clock has started?
The fingers hovering, waiting for you.
Great. Thank you, Chairman and members. Since we considered this application in January, the people of Compton have voted to approve their neighbourhood development plan. The turnout was 48.9%, with 98% voting in favour. These are higher figures than the national average for such referenda. And as we know, the NDP carries full weight in our considerations this evening. The NDP clearly refers to 140 homes, a figure which is also reflected in the district-wide local plan. But this application proposes 160, which is an extra 20. Tonight's agenda pack cites a 4-year-old survey to try to justify having additional homes on the site, a survey in which 191 people said that they thought additional homes would be acceptable. The bottom line is that 588 people voted just 2 weeks ago in the NDP referendum to say that 140 homes was acceptable. 588 votes in favour of the NDP is much higher than 191 survey returns in an informal survey. There were around 330 objections to this application, including the local parish councils, and we need to be in no doubt this would represent a 25% increase in the size of the village, so it's very significant. There are concerns about the impact on infrastructure, so roads, schools and the doctor's surgery, for example. It's been very difficult to recruit doctors and there's been a high turnover. I'm concerned about the lack of consistency in the advice being given to members. Paragraph 5.16 of the original pack from last month said this is not major development according to criteria in the NPPF, but in tonight's cover sheet, it is referred to as major development. So we need clarity if we're to make a decision this evening. The NDP recommends the retention of the hostel, which we know this application does not support. We need the 1 and 2 bedroom accommodation that a refurbished hostel building could provide. We've been advised that the housing mix will be reserved for the next stage of planning, which I recognise and respect, but I don't understand why the applicant didn't take the last month as an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to providing that housing. We've heard one of them say this evening that he recognises the need for affordable housing. If that's the case, why is the 1 bed and the 2 bed need not clearly in this planning application? So as far as I'm concerned, this application does not meet the strategic housing market assessment. It does not meet the council's housing strategy, and it does not meet the needs of the housing need survey, which was done in Compton and which is cited in policy C5 of the NDP. Regarding the pickled pig and piglets nursery, it's great that they have made a concession, but as we've discussed this evening, it would not be in a fit state to use straight away. We don't know how much it would cost to the parish council, and as they have said, they don't have the money available. And the NDP does say, to quote, retention, renovation and enhanced. It doesn't just say handover in a state of disrepair. Locals are also concerned about employment. They're not convinced that there is no demand for an enterprise hub. We've heard that many people in the village used to work on the site, so there will be the need for employment. There aren't enough buildings in the village for employment at the moment. The School Road industrial site is full. We also heard last time that the gatehouse could be used as public toilets, but this evening we're being told that it could be used as an employment hub if necessary. So I don't think there's any clear thinking about the employment need on this site. Regarding contamination, I won't repeat what we've already discussed this evening. I would like to make a point about traffic. This planning application, if approved, is going to have a very big impact on East Ilsley, which is my village, to declare an interest. We've been told there are going to be approximately 100 vehicle movements per day during demolition and 280 during the construction phase.
That's 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is going to create a lot of pressure on Compton, on East Ilsley and potentially on Hampstead Norreys as well, if any traffic leaves that way. Anything that goes through East Ilsley has to negotiate a tight, blind pinch point in the centre of the village. And it also has to pass past the front of people's houses, which have no buffer zone. There's no garden, there's no pavement. You're going to have all of these lorries rumbling past the front of people's houses for many years. And in conclusion, the flooding and the sewage, we have no confidence, as we've seen in the news, that Thames Water is going to deliver the appropriate infrastructure that's needed. We've heard this evening that foul water is backed up into people's properties, and I don't accept in here that we should wait for 20 houses or 49 houses to be occupied before Thames Water do more work. I think they need to do all of the necessary work on foul water conclusion, before any house is occupied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Members, questions. I've got Councillor Vickers first, please.
Quick and easy one. I'm afraid, Councillor Culver, thank you for that. There's lots of good points there, but I didn't catch the paragraph numbers you gave when you talked about the conflicting treatment of the word major. So if you could repeat them, because I wanted to read the context of those two.
Yes. So paragraph 5.16 of the pack from January, which I believe is in the back of
5.16.
That's correct, yeah. And in the cover sheet tonight, where it makes reference to zero carbon, it refers to it being major development.
Okay, I can probably find that one actually. Have you got the para number right there on your prepared?
Yeah, it's in the cover sheet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, it's actually in the update sheet.
In the update sheet.
Thank you.
Yes.
Right. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wollaston.
Yeah, I'm just slightly confused in that, as I understand it, the development plan accepts the fact there should be development on this site. I think everybody probably accepts that it's an eyesore and you've got contamination there which really does need to be dealt with. So whatever happens to it, if you accept that the development is going to happen, you're going to have traffic going through East Ilsley whilst it's being decontaminated and then construction going ahead. So I can understand perhaps the argument between 160 and 140, but beyond that, I struggle to see what the problem is. I just wonder whether you've got any views on that.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I think the problem with this is the planning application does not meet several of the policies in the NDP, and the NDP is supposed to be given full weight in our considerations this evening. So there are a number of reasons why I'm concerned. It's the number of the houses, the fact that the district heating policy C4 is not met, the housing mix policy C5 is not met, the hostel retention C6 is not met, the housing size C7 is not met, the business hub C11 is not met, and the renovation of the pickle pig policy C13 is not met. So there are many. I accept your points about traffic. There would have to be traffic, whether there were 10 houses there or 160. But ultimately, I think if the NDP is to be worth the paper it's written on, the fact it does not meet all of those important policies, to my mind, makes this of great concern this evening.
Councillor Wilson, is that you done? Members, any further questions of clarification from the ward member? No. Thank you very much, Councillor Culver. I'm now going to move on to questions of clarification of officers. Members, I've got Councillor Abbs first, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Very quick one, actually, because I can't find it again when I'm scanning through the document. I thought I'd read somewhere that the Secretary of State might call this in. Is that on approval or if we reject it?
Mr. Till, did you want to pick that one up, please?
I actually have Mrs. Mather in the meeting.
Oh, she's back on, is she? Mrs. Mather, good evening.
Hello, are you able to hear me? I had some IT issues earlier.
I'm glad you're able to join us. Would you like to pick up that question from Councillor Abbs, please, Mrs. Mather?
Yes. A third party has submitted a request to the Secretary of State for call-in for their own for the Secretary of State to determine the application. That process only starts if the recommendation by committee is for approval. So if you were to recommend granting permission, then we have to go back to the planning case unit and advise them of that, and then we await the decision as to whether the Secretary of State decides to call it in or not, if that helps.
Well, I think so. I just want to make sure I've understood it properly. So it's not the Secretary. It doesn't say that the Secretary of State will call this in if we approve tonight. It will be the Secretary of State will consider if it should be called in if we were to approve tonight.
Yes, and they can issue a stop notice on us issuing a decision until they have decided.
But that's been done by a third party. It's not the Secretary of State or.
No, they've received a request. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Wilson, question 2.
I imagine it might be Mrs. Mather. Could we condition this consent, if we were to grant consent, to mean that there has to be one-bedroom accommodation on site? And secondly, could we condition it that there has to be a contribution to the pickled pig?
In terms of the housing mix, that's a reserve matter. So the process would be at reserve matters. There would be a housing mix put forward, and we would consult housing strategy, and they would review whether the proposed housing mix complied with their housing register, the other evidence base that they have on housing need in the district. For the affordable housing, it would come under the section 106, so that may be agreed earlier, but otherwise it would be reserve matters. So ordinarily, there will be a requirement for one-bedroom dwellings, and and the number of those will be advised on by housing strategy for the affordable units. For the market housing, again, if we feel that it's not acceptable at reserve matters, then the reserve matters can be refused. I don't know.
That's supplementary. Could it be put into section 106 in that case?
I don't know. I might ask Sharon about that, if that's okay. Sharon, sorry.
Yes, in principle, you could. I think my only reservation is we obviously don't have the housing officer here, so we don't know what is required in terms of what they require of housing in the area. So we could agree that tonight, and then we could go back to them and they could say, no, absolutely, we don't want one bed. I have no idea because I haven't had any.
Could we phrase it something like would look favourably on?
what you could do is you could say that members would prefer to see one bedroom housing, subject to the housing officer having an objection to it or something along those lines. I don't know if Mr. Till's got anything to add there or any other concerns he might have, or indeed.
Thank you, Mrs. Armour. Thank you, Councillor Williston. I would suggest in this particular case that as Mrs. Armour's and Mrs. Mather have both suggested, that this really comes down to the housing officer looking at the particular need in the area for one-bedroom units. So I would suggest that in this case, an informative could be recommended that or could be imposed in the decision that directed the developer and the officers to consider the provision of one-bedroom units in the affordable housing mix during discussions to negotiate the Section 106 legal agreement. But in this particular case, I don't think it's a matter that could be conditioned, or I wouldn't recommend that it was conditioned, owing to the fact that quite simply the provision of one-bedroom units in the affordable housing mix might not meet the identified need when it comes to the housing officer.
Could we do the same thing on the pickled pig?
As an informative, you mean?
As an informative?
In respect of the pickled pig, if members wish officers to go away from this meeting and seek a dialogue with Homes England as to whether they're prepared to enter into a contribution towards the pickled pig, a negotiated contribution as part of the Section 106 legal agreement, then that's something that officers could take away from this meeting as an instruction.
Thank you, Councillor Williston. Thank you, Mr. Till. I've got Councillor Culver next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, 2 or 3 questions, if that's okay. In policy C4 of the NDP with regard to district heating, the applicant has said that it's not feasible to have district heating because the site's not big enough. But the NDP talks about a site of 10 dwellings or more, or 0.5 hectares or more. The housing alone covers 7 hectares. So why do we have an NDP that talks about district heating being viable on a small area of land, and yet this huge area of land we're saying it's not viable? So that doesn't make sense to me. And then also with regard to the foul water, on page 32 and 33 of the document this evening, it talks about the fact that no more than 20 houses should be occupied until the foul water infrastructure is dealt with, and no more than 49 until the water network has been upgraded. I just wonder if officers could elaborate on why they've chosen the figures 20th and 49th, and also whether it would be acceptable to officers were we to remove point 2 of condition 29 and condition 30, and just make the condition that all of those works need to be done before any house is occupied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Who'd like to pick that one up, please?
Could I deal with the Thames Water one first?
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
So the numbers of houses given in the condition, so the 20 for the foul and the 49 for the water, are from Thames Water themselves. So that's the number of units they felt could be accommodated within the existing infrastructure. I totally understand the point that there are issues locally anyway. So that's the advice that we've been given from Thames Water. If you wanted to change that condition, so it's a pre-commencement condition that there's a lower number, or then that's fine. We can amend that condition. If it's a pre-commencement condition, there are regulations where we would need to double check with the applicant. They have a right to comment on pre-commencement conditions, but again, we can, sorry, pre-occupation. Yes, that's true. It wouldn't be pre-commencement, would it? No, that's fine. Yeah, so it could be a pre-occupation condition. if you wanted to remove it so that no house could be occupied until that infrastructure is in place, that's fine. As I say, the numbers are what we were given from Thames Water. They're not something that we've come up with ourselves. Sorry, the first point was, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the first question.
Yeah, sorry, Mrs. Mather, I'll repeat it. It's about policy C4 in the NDP about district heating.
Yes.
So the applicant has said it's not viable to do that on this site, but the policy C4 makes reference to 10 dwellings or more on a site of over 0.5 hectares. This is significantly bigger than that, and yet we're being told it's not viable. So if you can elaborate, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. This one's slightly more difficult to answer in that I fully respect that policy is there. Obviously, the policy has been drafted and has been moving along at the same time that the application has been submitted. The only thing I can really say is from our core strategy policies and our own allocations, the only ones that specifically have those kind of requirements are Sandalford and the race course. They had specific requirements for that. So that was 1,500 and 2,000 houses. I can't, it doesn't comply with that policy, but as I say, in the report, we set out that there can be compliance with CS15 in terms of achieving zero carbon, and that can be conditioned. So yes, it wouldn't be a district heating system, but it would still need to be zero carbon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, Mr. Little, thank you for joining us this evening. I see your hand shoot up at that point. Would you like to come in there, please?
Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, please, Chairman. In terms of district housing, there is a cut-off point whereby demand for heating peaks, and you cannot generate enough renewable energy during the day to meet your peak demand on a certain size. On the small sites, that is a lot easier to achieve because of how it's packed. So between the medium to the large site, there becomes a cut-off point where it is not achievable. Unfortunately, we have not been able to achieve that at the racecourse, and we wait to see whether or not the Secretary of State, what he decides about what happens on Sandalford.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Councillor Culver, did you want to come back on that, or?
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I respect the officer's advice, but it just makes me wonder why it's even in the NDP in the first place. So thank you very much for your answers, officers.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. I've got Councillor Rolls next,
Thank
please.
you, Chairman. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, the point around this, where basically there's an additional 20 houses, which seem to be termed approximate. So I'd like to understand that interpretation of approximate resulting in the additional 20 houses. And also the point that Councillor Culver raised around major development. I'd like some clarity around the advice in the pack around that to members. And also finally, just a question to Mr. Goddard on highways. Last time, sorry, Mr. Goddard, is that a cat? Sorry. Last time I asked this question regarding the traffic modelling, because it was conducted in 2017, and my concern was that's quite out of date. And I think your comment was around the fact that actually that was quite sort of reflective of a true position, in that obviously we've had COVID since then. So it was more reflective. My question on that is 2017 is still quite a long way before, quite a long way, a long time ago. And I know it's not just about the impact of COVID, it's about the profile of the surrounding villages, the profile of other developments or other houses in the vicinity, that has changed potentially significantly in 4 years. And I just wondered if you could comment on that. So those questions to officers. Thank you.
Mr. Goddard, do you want to pick that one up first, please? I don't mean the cat, I mean the question.
Sorry, the cat's bothering me. He probably wants feeding again. My apologies. It's a good question that Councillor Rolls raises, and thank you for that. The difficulty for me on this is that I would be reluctant to take fresh surveys at this point. I still think that traffic levels are still settling down. We don't know what sort of pattern is emerging. It's still too early to tell. The council does have recording stations all across the district. And the latest figures that we have is up to the end of last year. And the fourth quarter, the traffic levels overall were down 16% from what they were the fourth quarter in 2019, before COVID. And the third quarter of 2021, the traffic levels overall were down 15%, 15, from what they were the third quarter in 2019. With those figures currently in place and the increased pattern of more online shopping and more people working from home, I am confident. I know the evidence is limited at the moment, but I am confident that traffic levels going forward for the next few years will still be lower than what they were in 2017 from the surveys that were taken at that time. And I think Councillor Rolls is correct that there may be other developments in the area that would not have been considered now. But the 2017 levels would have been also growthed up using government statistics to 2023 levels. So not only are traffic levels a lot lower than what they were, I think, in 2017, but they are also growthed up as well to make an even higher level. So therefore, I'm confident that the 2017 data growthed up to 2023 is the most robust data that I think we can have in assessing this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Officers who'd like to pick up Councillor Rolls' questions about the interpretation of the word approximately.
Yeah, thank you. May I do the major development one first, because that one might be a little bit easier.
Please do.
So there's two definitions of major development. One is purely about the size of an application. So the application is major because it's more than 10 houses. But in terms of development in the AUMB, that it's not defined. So in the original agenda at 5:15, so for the purposes of major development in the AUMB, it's a matter for the decision maker. So the report sets out that where the site has been allocated and those considerations a part of allocating it would have had to consider whether it was major development in the AUMB, and the site has been allocated. The question then is, do we consider the additional 20 houses to take that into major development in the AUMB? That is a matter for your consideration as decision maker. So there are two separate. One is defined just in terms of the size of the application. So again, where there's reference in the update sheet to the zero carbon, it's major development because it's more than 10 houses. Therefore, that policy requirement kicks in. It's a separate consideration in terms of major development in the AUMB. If you were to consider it major development in the AUMB, again, the agenda report sets out that usually it would be refused except for exceptional circumstances, and the report sets out the exceptional circumstances to be considered. So that's the that's that one. I think
Mrs. Mather,
speak first before I answer the other question. So I think Simon would like to speak and possibly Brian on that matter, and I'll come back to the approximate.
Well, I'll go to. Thank you very much, Mrs. Mather. I'll go to Mr. Little first, then, please.
Thank you. As Ms. Mather has quite rightly said, applications in the AUMB say permission should be refused for major development other than in exceptional circumstances. Those exceptional circumstances were considered at the Housing Site Allocations Development Plan document examination in public in 2017. and the inspector looked at all the arguments put forward, both for the inclusion of the site and the exclusion of the site. And at that moment, at that time, declared that he was content that the site should be allocated and that it met the tests. And that is where we would stand today from a policy point of view, that it is major development, but it meets the exception tests as rightly set out in the report.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Ms. Mather, did you want to come back on the approximate interpretation?
I can do. I'm not sure if Simon wanted to add anything on there.
Mr. Till?
Thank you, Chairman. No, actually, Mr. Little's interjected with pretty much what I was going to say. Thank you.
If I may then, Chairman, in planning policy terms, we have to have a 10% flexibility allowance. When we're doing our housing numbers are a minimum, not a maximum. And this is where we get this approximation issue in. And therefore, I would totally agree with officers where they turn around and say 14% uplift is approximately, and that would be acceptable. At appeal, some inspectors will go as high as 20% and still say it's in compliance with policy.
Sorry, can I just have a point of
Rolls? Yes, please
can I
do.
just clarify? Did you say yield flex is 10%?
The government would have a automatic 10% flexibility. It's called a flexibility allowance for non-delivery of planning sites.
Forgive my maths because I'm really bad at maths. So what percentage is this?
This is 14%.
So you're over the 10%?
We're over the 10%, but we are below the, say, 20% that some inspectors will allow on appeal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rolls, you're done there, eh? Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Barnett next, please.
Yes, through you, Chairman. Question to Mr. Gollard. Oh, you're back on the screen, Mr. Gollard. You've obviously removed your little pussy. Is that correct? Mr. Gollard, I know we were talking about at the last meeting about these HGV movements in relationship to the road from East Ilsley to Compton, and it's been reiterated again by Councillor Culver tonight at the narrow roads. The point that I think, and I've been thinking this through in the last few minutes, these HGV movements presumably have been very much based on the actual construction side of the site. What about the actual decontamination? Because if it is correct, and we haven't had it confirmed, but obviously there's been a lot of discussions around it about possible contaminated land from a radiological point of view, then of course that has put a different complexion on the transport of radioactive materials in relationship to defined routes, defined times, and obviously the quantity being carried. Has that been considered as well?
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. Yeah, I can answer that. Yes, it has been considered, but not completely at this stage, hence the condition that you have in your pack that details will need to be finalised and submitted with the construction management plan. We do have some information so far that suggests that during demolition, and therefore I'm assuming inside decontamination as well, there would be 20 lorries a day in and out of the site, which is the same as the level projected for during construction as well. What I don't know at the moment is what duration this will be, over how much time. So we do need to have that information, and we do need to consider how whether we need to put in mitigation along the route through and to East Ilsley. I think that route is the best route. I think it's the worst of a number of options. I wouldn't want HGVs to go on down through Hermitage and Hampstead Norreys, for instance. The route for East Ilsley is the quickest and most direct route to the A34 onto the strategic road network. But we do need to consider within the construction management plan with further detail that needs to be submitted, how we manage them going through East Ealsley going forward, and whether we need to put measures in place. What we have so far within the construction management plan is that there will be no HGV movements during peak travel times in the morning or in the afternoon. So hopefully that will ease any potential for any congestion that residents of East Ealsley sometimes says does occur in East Ealsley with the narrow sections of road, particularly approaching East Ealsley from the Compton direction. So I think your concerns have been considered, but there is a little bit more further work to do that is secured by condition 19 within your pack. Thank you.
Can I just make a further comment? Mr. Gollard, I mean, my old job previously years ago was transport radioactive materials across the UK. So I've had a little bit of experience in that field, and I'm obviously aware of the need for proper assessments and the concern of local residents. And my main concern, obviously, was in relationship to Councillor Culver's point about narrow roads, very restricted in the village. And clearly, if there is a need for that material to be taken off site, which I'm sure it will be, it will have to be going to a recognised location, which could well be Drigg in Cumbria, I don't know, depending on the levels involved. So of course it will be on the route that you've just suggested, but it would have to be, and I would hope from what you've said, it will not be coincided with double-decker buses taking youth to the Compton school. That's all I would say.
I would hope not to. Thank you.
Chairman, am I permitted to make a point of information, if I may?
Yes.
Yeah, if members will indulge me, thank you. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Goddard just said 20 movements a day, but the pack says 100 vehicle movements a day during demolition and 280 during construction.
Mr. Goddard?
What I mentioned there was HGVs. I did mention staff, and you're absolutely right. Altogether, there would be 280 vehicle movements per day. What I'm focusing on and more worried about is HGVs for the points that yourself and Councillor Barnett have mentioned, and that's 20 HGVs out and 20 HGVs in a day during demolition and during construction is currently projected.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard.
Thank you for your interjection there, Councillor Culver. I've got Councillor Vickers next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Two completely different points, which are referenced. Well, the first one may be that Mr. Little is the best person to answer. There was reference made to the possible call-in by Secretary of State. Now, judging by the time that can take to actually have an inspector appointed and consider the matter, we'd be into the Regulation 19 new local plan. And I'm wondering if Mr. Little can explain to us if there are any policies in the emerging local plan that might throw a whole different light on this particular major development.
Mr. Little, do you want to pick that up?
And if that was the case, would it come back to us to have one of these hypothetical meetings like we have when there is an appeal for non-determination, whether we'd have a chance to debate it in the light of the new policy at any stage?
Mr. Little?
There are no current plans to change the policy on Compton. From that was previously gone through the examination. In terms of the call-in procedure, we would have a notification well before the summer. It will be.
I lost you then, Mr. Little.
Can you hear me now?
No.
I've got another question to a different officer.
Okay, well, once you sort yourself out, Mr. Little, you can still hear me. If you just, we'll take another question first and then come back to you.
One of the other officers might be able to answer that, because I think your time frame in terms of a call-in is not as long as you think it is. So I don't know if Mr. Till can possibly answer it. I think we're talking weeks, not months.
Yeah, that's when the decision to call in is made, but then the Secretary of State would need to appoint an inspector. The inspector would need to read the stuff, and by the time you get to actually the inspector making the decision. We're way past the Regulation 19 publication, and that new policy now has considerable weight. That's what I'm thinking of. And it may, I don't know, we haven't seen that new policy yet, but
Brian was just shaking his head, but I don't think we can hear him. So.
Can you hear me now?
No, Mr. Little, we can't hear you at the moment. We'll come back.
It's a bit hypothetical, Chairman, because the Secretary of State may say, were we to approve this tonight, fine, I'm not worried about that. So in which case the whole question dies. Just for the minutes, I would like recorded that I'd raised the point, though, if that was possible. The second question might seem a minor one, but we are talking about the only non-reserved matter apart from demolition is the access. Now that the Pickle Pig, which is right on the border of the site, is likely to become a community facility, do we really want everybody who goes in to use it to go in through the main gate off the main road? Because it could be accessed by the rest of the village directly from Churn Road. I wonder if that was looked at, and if it's something that, if it hasn't been looked at, could be considered before. Just has Mr. Goddard thought about that, and what do others think?
Do you want to pick that up, Mr. Goddard, first?
I have to say no. I've given no thought to it.
Trouble hearing you now, Mr. Goddard. Mr. Till, you're a little closer.
I think, given her closer knowledge of the case, I'll pass you over to the case officer for comments on that matter.
Thank you.
So there are 3 accesses to the site. One is the main access off the high street.
Chairman, I apologise. It appears that we're struggling with sound. In respect of access, then the proposals are partly formulated.
Can anybody hear me?
Just, take a pause there for a moment, please, and we'll check to see that this is going live.
Can anybody hear me? I mean, Lydia and Paul can. Anybody in the council chamber? Anybody in the council chamber?
Anyone can hear me?
I think the point was made, but I think we'll just wait until we'll hold that thought while we just confirm this is being.
If the public can't hear, we
shouldn't
really be debating.
It's live on you. It's okay. Okay.
Brian, could you speak again, please?
Yes, I can. Can anybody?
Thank you.
Can anybody hear me?
Can't hear you, sorry.
I am speaking. Lydia, can you hear me? If you can you just put your hand? Yeah. Sorry, council chamber.
Can everyone hear me as well? Brian,
Chairman, may I suggest you do a sound check of each of the officers?
I think that's very wise, actually, Mrs. Armour. Mr. Oliver, if you would, I think we'll take 5 minutes just to get this one back up online. And members, if you mute your mics.
Brian, please could you try again?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, members, are we good to go? Yeah. Okay, Lizzie, thank you very much. And welcome back. Sorry about that technical issue. You left us just as Councillor Vickers was putting some questions to officers. Councillor Vickers, please.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, if you would, please.
Yes, my first question was to Mr. Little, really, regarding what would happen if the Secretary of State did decide to call it in, and that's assuming we decide tonight to approve it, given that we have a new local plan going through and the timescales involved. And the second question was to Mr. Goddard about with the Pickle Pig now being retained as a community facility, I'm looking at the access, and if it's not provided directly off Churn Road, which is adjacent to the building with the car park off Churn Road, I'm thinking there would be a parking issue on Churn Road because local residents who don't live on the estate would be bound to save themselves the drive through the estate by just parking on Churn Road.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Vickers. On that subject then, Mr. Goddard, do you want to pick that one up, please?
I can. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. I can hear the echo too. Thank you, Councillor Vickers. It's a good question. Unfortunately, I can say at this stage I've not considered that, whether they would be scope in the more detailed reserve matters planning application to consider this further with perhaps an access onto Churn Road. I suspect we may be able to consider it at that time. Planning officers may be able to advise a little bit further, but in answer to your question, no, it hasn't been considered so far by me at this stage.
Just as a supplementary, I'm just thinking that for the people on the estate, it should all be in walking, cycling distance, so they don't really need a car park for themselves. The car park is more for people coming up from a longer distance.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Little, did you want to pick up on Councillor Vickers' initial question?
Yeah, certainly. The Secretary of State will determine the application in line with policy. So at this stage, it would be the Housing Site Allocations DPD. And even if we were at Reg 19, it would be looking at the policy there, but giving more weight to the adopted policy rather than the emerging policy, unless they were both the same.
And would it come back to us, given the change in circumstance, for a sort of... No.
No.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm now going to go to Councillor Abs, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. A very little one from Ms. Mather. I think earlier she talked about the sustainability, the deliverability of the sustainability of this development, CS15 references. And that, yes, we could use other methods rather than the community energy methodology to deliver it. So on that basis, I did a quick look at the slightly more detailed, although that's not a matter for discussion this evening, really. It does basically give us something to look at that says, well, this is what we're proposing. And actually, I think only about 30%, less than 30% of the buildings shown and the orientation would have any kind of solar gain. The rest of them are all orientated incorrectly. So given that it wouldn't be ground source, given that it wouldn't be wind, given that solar's done badly, how are we going to achieve? How are you confident that we're going to achieve?
Next question to Mrs. Mather.
Yeah. So the master plan is illustrative, so it wouldn't be an approved plan. So the layout is a reserve matter. There's a condition for a zero carbon strategy. The applicant would need to comply with that. So I would envisage that they would need to look again at the layout, as you say, in terms of orientation, to be able to achieve it.
And a quick supplementary to that, of course. And so if these 2 pages, 112, 113, are pretty much worthless, because they're the ones that show me all the layout, the internal routing, the traffic is also something that's worthless. Am I interpreting that correctly? And this is all for
I wouldn't say worthless. So
you just said that we're going to have to relay it out to kind of get.
Yes, I mean, all I mean is if the opinion is that it's not all of the houses are orientated appropriately to be able to meet the zero carbon strategy, then that would need to be reviewed. My point was more that it's not fixed at this stage and it would need to form part of that review. I don't mean it's worthless. The point of an illustrative master plan is to show how you could fit the number of houses, you know, one way of fitting the houses within the site, within the wider parameter plans. But yes, you're right, the internal roads aren't fixed on the.
I see that's important to officers to have some kind of vision, but if the vision is so far out from what actually will be delivered, and it has so many impacts. I have concern. By the way, Chairman, if nobody else puts their hand up and you want to go into debate, I'm happy to kick off.
Well, I'm looking around the room now and I don't see anything, and I'm more than happy then members to move this on to debate. And I'll be Councillor Apps, thank you very much.
I'll leave my mic on. Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I think it's fascinating look into how government bodies get involved in stuff and bring things forward. So first one I've been through where Homes England has been put forward. First thing I say, viable villages. The Parish Council, it seemed to be excellent here, brought forward an NDP. And they showed support for a clear number of homes. They're really not telling us, no, not here. It's no NIMBYism involved whatsoever. The local people tell us exactly what the local area can support. That carries an awful lot of weight with me. Homes England, however, seem to have approached it from the other way, which is they are required to clean the site up and prepare it such that a builder can come along and build something on it. Their job is to help deliver homes. Great. So once they've done that, in whatever form that and guidance we give them, is basically goes out to bid, and the builders will come along and say, right, this is what I'm allowed to build because that's the planning permission I have. It could have been 50 houses. Some builder sooner or later will come along and said, well, okay, well, this is how much money I'm willing to give you to get the site to do that build. In other words, they will want to make a profit. That's fine. But, the parameters are what are set by Homes England, the Parish Council, West Berkshire Council, and so on and so forth. So whatever happens here, I think sooner or later something will be approved by the looks of it, with the great care that needs to be taken to take care of all the toxicity on the land and so on. However, we must be cognizant of the years and years and years of impact this cleaning up and then building will have not only on that village, but surrounding villages. And the bigger the development is, the more that impact goes on. So I'd like to listen to the rest of the debate, of course, but my gut is that we should be listening to the Parish Council in this case and not approving the application in its current form.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Apps. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't really want to repeat a lot of the stuff that I've already said this evening, but I think I would like to emphasise the point about the hostel. So the point has been made that it would be good from a carbon point of view to keep the pickled pig because it means a building's not knocked down, but surely that should also apply to the hostel. Again, I recognise the fact that the housing mix is going to be a reserved matter for a future application, but it does concern me that there's a consistent lack of respect for our policies as a council. We have a strategic housing assessment, we have a housing strategy, etc. And it's very, very clear that we have to build more 1 and 2 bed houses. And that isn't only affordable houses, that's private houses as well. And as we all know, unless people have the opportunity to buy a small home on the market, they're unlikely to then be able to go on and buy a bigger home. The only way you can get enough capital for a bigger home is to have a smaller home in the first place. And it's very clear from the issues document, which was produced alongside the NDP, which other members may not have had the opportunity to read, but a housing needs survey was conducted, and it was very, very clear from this that there is a need for more affordable housing. And I don't understand why the proposers of this application have not addressed these important issues. So it talks about the fact that a lot of the respondents to the survey were from 3 and 4 bedroom houses, but it acknowledges that that's probably because most of the people in the village live in 3 and 4 bedroom houses. So we're not getting the data that we need because those houses are not there in the first place. And it's also very clear from a table in the document that there are very many people who would like a 1-bed home, either affordable or private, but there are many instances in here about people having insufficient income or insufficient money for a deposit. We know I made this point at the last meeting and councillors absent and Vickers wouldn't have heard me make it, but we know with COVID, one of the lessons that we've learned is that we need more smaller homes. We need people to be able to live with their extended family. So that could be young adults, That could be the elderly who want to downsize. Unless those houses are there, people will leave the village. And that again is acknowledged in this documentation. People are leaving villages like Compton because there is not the accommodation there that they need. They cannot buy a house and they cannot downsize. And if we are going to have a robust, sustainable society in the future and deal with things like pandemics, we need people to be able to stay in the same area. We need young people to be able to look after the elderly and not have had to have moved many miles away because the accommodation isn't there. So again, I repeat, I acknowledge it's for reserved matters, but how can we as members have confidence that these applicants have taken the NDP into consideration, especially around housing, when we've had a pack in December, a pack in January, and now a pack in February, and none of them address the issue of 1 and 2 bedroom houses. And if they're to have respect for us as an authority, they should have looked at those issues and they should have mentioned them in here. They've mentioned how many 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses they want to build. So why have they not addressed the issue of 1 bedroom houses? With regard to the contamination, I'm really concerned. We obviously as members are not experts in contamination and which organisations look after that, but we have been advised this evening that the main body is the Environment Agency, and we know that that is drastically underfunded as a body, it's under-resourced, there aren't enough officers. So will the people of Compton have sufficient confidence that that has been dealt with properly? The paper talks about leaving some of the spoil on the site. We need a condition to say that whatever spoil is left behind has to be carefully checked for contamination. And on the contamination issue, earlier members asked for more detail. There was a former vet on the site who wrote a letter in to the original planning application, who said that there is radioactive waste from Bikini Atoll that was actually brought to that site and used to test on animals. They also said that there was highly radioactive waste which was left in barrels in the ground. So, you know, this is a really serious thing. And as Councillor Strong from Compton mentioned, we need to have some sort of evacuation strategy. She said that there was a problem previously, so we know it's possible that it will happen. So I would like to see a condition along those lines as well to give the residents confidence that we have thought about that if something does go wrong. And just finally, Chairman and members, I mentioned earlier there are, I think, 7 policies to my mind and in my interpretation in the NDP that this application does not meet. It doesn't meet the fact that it says 140 homes. It doesn't meet the district heating. It doesn't address the housing mix. It doesn't address the hostel retention. It doesn't address the house size. It doesn't address the business hub. And it doesn't fully address the issue about the pickled pig. So whilst there are matters of debate and interpretation around those policies, I would beg the question, if we are not going to respect those policies, what is the point of having an NDP? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. I'm going to move to Councillor Vickers next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, just to pick up straight from the last point Councillor Culver made, I think the people who were behind the NDP should be quite pleased with the fact that 14 out of 17 of their recommendations that are partially, well, 14 recommendations appear to be fully taken on board, and we've seen the changes that have been made in the proposals as a result, and 3 others are partially accepted. I haven't looked at everything. I haven't read the full NDP, to be honest, but I think there's a lot of good to come out of it, and I wouldn't want to discourage people from pursuing an NDP. There are many policies probably in our own district local plan that have not been given perhaps as much weight as we would have liked either. It's always a question of balance. And just because you have an NDP doesn't mean to say that everything gets accepted and trumps everything else that's in the district local plan. It means it's given full weight. So I'm inclined to support the recommendation. However, there's a lot that needs to go into conditions and looked at very carefully. And even the matter about the hostel, which I raised in the debate, and I'm unhappy about, I'm pretty reassured that even if we approve this application, it doesn't mean to say that hostel will definitely be demolished. It may be that on reflection, lots of planning applications don't get implemented in full because the developer decides he doesn't want to implement them. You don't have to implement everything that you've got permission to do. I would hope that the developer can relook at that, and in the light of a more up-to-date housing survey, I do think that there is room to accommodate one-bed flats and to upgrade them to modern standards. So I don't think that's a reason to refuse. I think it's a reason to minutes that we are concerned about the fact that it is being demolished and that there would be considerable merit in keeping it, both, you know, because of the embedded carbon, as I said, and also because it would be a slight sort of record of the history of the site to be able to continue using a building, although it may have no architectural merit, it's part of the history of the site. So the issue of major, I think, is beyond doubt settled. I mean, if you read in full pages 63 to 65 of the original report, as officers have told us, I have no problems. I have no problems with the increase either. I think it does get covered. I mean, there's no way that if we refused on the grounds of those extra 20 homes, that would be upheld in appeal, in my opinion. And I think the officers were telling us that they agree with that. So I think 140 or 160, even in a village where it is a substantial increase, and it's only up to, they may not implement the full 160. They may find good reasons why, for example, the land occupied by the Pickle Pig was actually 2 houses. Well, they've lost them. If they're going to build 160, they've got to find somewhere else to build them. Traffic, I think, as Mr. Goddard mentioned, and we all go on about, you know, going through East Ilsley, and yes, it's a problem. Yes, the HGVs during construction are going to be a problem. But once the construction is over, and let's have a very, very good construction management plan that covers that, we could have an employment site with a lot more movements during the day. You know, so the increase in movements overall for the lifetime of the site is not going to be enough to refuse. So I will conclude by saying that, yes, the conditions are major. And if we have a motion that is approved and seconded, Chairman, I'm sure we'll come back and look in more detail at the conditions, as we always do. We'll want to go back to officers for advice. But I'll let others have their say. But I am certainly minded to support at this moment a recommendation to approve the application broadly, as officers have recommended.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. I'm going to move now to Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep this fairly brief because a lot of the points have already been made. I also just wanted to congratulate the Compton residents for the NDP and join other members in doing that. I mean, my thoughts are it's very clear that this is a site that needs to be developed. It's an eyesore. It needs some, we need to move forward on it. And that's very clear. And I think we're all in agreement, as is the Parish Council. And I think quite a lot of the things that we have raised tonight can be conditioned. I am slightly disappointed in the responses that we have been given in respect of community assets. I think that could have been dealt with better. However, where I slightly struggle is the increase from 140 to 160. And I am slightly disappointed that where we have a flex of 10%, we're on 14%, and we're relying on what we think would happen at appeal. I just feel there could have been a little bit more meeting in the middle somewhere, which would have been, which I think would have sort of dealt with my concerns on that. So I'm struggling a little bit with the increase, but I do accept that a lot of what we've dealt with, spoken about today, can be conditioned. And as I say, we need to move forward on this site. So I'm just going to listen to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of what I was going to say has already been said by Councillor Vickers. What reassures me, I think, is the identity of the applicant. We do have Homes England here, a government body. It's not like a developer who's trying to get the cheapest deal they can do to decontaminate. They're going to do a proper job. And there's no question in my mind it is a complete eyesore. It's probably detrimental to the village anyway, because it's just going to deteriorate even further if we don't do something with it. And I'm minded to support officer's recommendation. And I'd like to, if you don't mind, Chairman, make that proposal, subject to conditions and informatives.
Well, I'll take that, and I'll go first to Councillor Barnett.
Well, Chairman, mine's not actually to support Councillor Wollaston, or at least not at this particular point. I mean, I think it's been very helpful to actually have the opportunity for a second bite of the cherry, if you like to say that, because I think we've gone into a lot more depth tonight in regarding the application. And I think it's been very helpful to hear the views again reiterated, perhaps in a slightly different way, by the local community. But, you know, I still have some concern that, you know, the local community are going to be affected. And yes, we do want to see this site cleaned up, and we want to see that the village and the surrounding area is enhanced in some way. But nevertheless, there is going to be a great impact for several, not 18 months, but several years. And whether the infrastructure is there. No, the ward members obviously identified straight away tonight about the doctor's surgery. I know there's very small amount of retail in the village itself, and I'm sure that that will need to be considered as well in the long term, although it's not part of this application tonight. I do have a little concern about this great pressure that we are finding, not only in this application, but other application, on the actual supply of clean water, as well as the removal of wastewater. It's coming up time and time again, and I think it's something that we're going to have to look at in great depth. And as a ward member, I get it every day of the week from constituents as well. In regard these other matters regarding the possible radionuclides that could be or might be present, I think that Homes England will have to look very closely at their records. I'm sure certain records will be available. They normally are. I worked in the nuclear industry for many years, and I'm a member of the radiation induced diseases register. And I think if there's any ex-employees of that old site that's still around at the moment, they will be members as well. And I'm sure that that information will be available, because I'm sure that they're going to have to look very hard and in depth to see exactly what is actually on that site. And that's the only thing that I really concern myself at this present time, is the effect of the local residents in what could be found and how it will be transported away from the site. So overall, I still have a slight reservation. I'm still similar to Councillor Abbs, sitting on the garden fence, and I'll just wait and hear a couple other comments before I come down which side of the fence to vote on this application.
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. I've got Councillor Vickers back in.
Well, I'm really wanting to move this on, and by seconding the application, but because everybody's had a say apart from you, Chairman, so far, and you may end up with, well, actually, I don't think the numbers make it likely you will have a casting vote. You'll have to just use your vote. But I wouldn't want to go any further without going through the conditions in detail, because my seconding of the motion is subject to us going through those conditions. And I know Councillor Culver has looked at them, and perhaps she might like to start with the ones that she's got issues with, and then others may have other conditions.
Thank you,
Is that all right, Jim?
Well, I'll take that. So I have a proposal from Councillor Wollaston, seconded by Councillor Vickers, and I have a raft of informatives and conditions written down here. But members, if we'd like to visit those now, Councillor Culver.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. If I may go through this. Condition 14 about the design code, it doesn't fully reflect the design code policy in the NDP. So it doesn't mention the fact that it should be in consultation with the community, and that the Building for Life assessment framework should be included, and also about the energy supply. So if the wording of that could be revisited, please, so it reflects what's in the NDP, that would be great. Also,
sorry, Councillor Culver, is it worth officers commenting on each of your conditions as we go along?
Yeah, that's fine.
Would that be of assistance?
Yep.
Thank you, Mrs. Armour. Who'd like to pick that up, please? Mrs. Mather?
Yep, sorry, would you mind, I got the energy supply. Would you mind just listing the matters you felt were missing from the NDP?
Yeah, so it says it should be in consultation with the community.
Okay.
And it also says it should follow the, to quote, building for life assessment framework. Yeah, it's in the NDP.
Yeah.
So we just need to make sure the wording reflects that, I think. Thank you. And then with regard to 18, I made the point at the last meeting whether we could add a condition about testing the water for contamination. So not only the land, but the water. And I think Mr. Till said that would be an acceptable condition when we discussed it at the last meeting. With regard to condition 19, if we could add in something about avoiding school hours for HGV movements, I think that would be welcome. 26, about spoil. So it mentions that some of the spoil will be left on the site. If we could strengthen the wording and say that we need clarity that none of that spoil will be contaminated and it will have been tested before it's left on the site, I'd be grateful.
Chairman, if I could just comment on that matter.
On the soil specifically?
On spoil, yes. Councillor Culver, if I can draw your attention to the requirements of Part B of Condition 18, which includes a remediation scheme which ensures that after remediation, as a minimum, the land shall not be capable of being determined as contaminated under Part 11A of the Environmental Protection Act 1990. The scheme must include all works to be undertaken, proposed remediation objectives and remediation criteria, timetable of works and site management procedures. So that would include any spoil left upon the site as part of the land forming the site.
Councillor Culver, does that satisfy?
Yes, so I'm satisfied with that, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Till. With regard to 29 and 30 about the foul water and the water network upgrades, if we could remove the second part of each of those so that it says that all of that work has to be ready before any house is occupied, I think that would be a more appropriate condition. So rather than accepting Thames Water's figures of 20th dwelling and 49th dwelling, I think the residents need to have the confidence to know no house will be occupied until the necessary infrastructure is in place, because we know that the current infrastructure is not good enough, let alone having extra houses.
Mrs. Mather, did you want to pick up on that?
So to remove the reference to the 20th and the 49th dwelling, and then remove the second, the bullet point number 2 within each of the.
Yes. Yep. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Mather. And Councillor Strong from Compton mentioned about having an evacuation plan because there'd been problems before. If we could put something in about that, I think that would be helpful.
Chairman, if I may contribute regarding that, I would suggest that a bullet point could be added to condition 18, requiring details of any emergency or evacuation measures necessary to address contamination hazardous to human health identified during site investigation, demolition, remediation or development works.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Culver.
Great. So that will make specific reference to an evacuation plan. Yeah, fabulous. Thank you, Mr. Till. And about the informative, I think we discussed an informative with regard to the developer making a contribution towards the pickled pig. If we could make that wording as strong as possible, I think, because it is in the NDP about it being renovated and enhanced. So if we can make that informative as strong as possible, I'd be grateful, please.
Chairman, if I may comment on that, thank you. Members, my suggestion is that rather than using an informative in respect of this matter, the resolution is that the matter should be investigated through the discussions between officers and the applicant in respect to the Section 106 legal agreement. And that if no contribution is secured, as a result of those discussions, within 3 months of the resolution, or such appropriate period of time as to be agreed with the Director of Service in consultation with yourself, Chairman, then the application will be brought back before members to consider at this committee.
Chairman, as I was sort of the one that introduced this whole line of conditions, I've got one more and a general point that if, it's all very well officers.
Sorry, it's specifically on this point regarding the.
Well, it's the reference back to the chairman. I think it would be useful to also include the ward member and chairman and/or vice chairman, so we don't hold things up, but we also get the maximum involvement of the ward member who's been closest to all of this. Would that be acceptable? I think it's happened before in similar circumstances, particularly with such a major development. And I've got one other condition that Councillor Culver hasn't mentioned.
Well, I'll just check with Dennis until you're happy with that.
Yes, it would be perfect.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
So chairman or vice chairman and ward member.
Yeah,
they could be consulted on any changes. And presumably, I think it's also normal that having agreed this here at this meeting, if it turns out to be impractical or impossible, would it come back for a debate? Or again, is that just referred to the chairman, vice chairman and ward member and leave it at that?
So would that be delegated or would that find its way back at committee?
In the event that the specific resolution amendment that I'm proposing is that in the event that a contribution does prove impractical and therefore can't be agreed through negotiation with officers, that the application is brought back before the committee.
I think in particularly of Thames Water, if they say no way are we going to change our insistence that we got to be allowed to occupy 49 houses before the water supply is sorted out, then that's not what we wanted. So we should be, I think, reconsulted. No?
Well, I think in terms of that condition, Councillor, because you've put it on, that's not a matter of negotiation. That's what you've put on the thing. If the applicant can't agree it, then they'll have to come back to amend the condition.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Culver, thank you, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Culver, did you want to finish up or indeed were you?
Yeah, that's covered everything. Thank you, Chairman and officers for that.
I just wanted to mention condition 1, actually. I don't understand. I mean, when I looked at where the public open space and wildlife area is, it's right up the north end. It's not going to be built on, but it has 2 very big buildings on it, which are almost the last in the demolition programme to be demolished. And what does begun mean? When do you begin to change use? It happens surely on a set date. So could I sort of just draw attention to the wording of condition 1 and perhaps have officers comment on what it means and whether it's practical, because I don't think 18 months is a reasonable time. I think it's going to take a lot longer to demolish those buildings, and it's one of the last to be demolished.
Mr. Till, did you want to look at that?
If you just bear with me for a second, Chairman, I'm just reviewing the wording of the condition now.
I'll leave that with you for a moment. I've got Councillor Wollaston with his hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think it's been raised yet, but forgive me if it has. I thought we were going to have an informative about the need for 1-bedroom properties.
That was mentioned in debate. That's correct.
Thank you, Chairman. In respect of the 1-bedroom properties matter, my suggestion is that regarding the affordable housing, that is explored by officers during the consideration of the Section 106 and those discussions. And in respect to the market housing, that is attached as an informative directing the applicant to look at the prospects for providing smaller properties.
Councillor Wilson, are you happy with that? That's informative. Members, anything further you wish to add? That being done, I will put the vote before the committee. We have a proposal by Councillor Wollaston, seconded by Councillor Vickers, bearing in mind the not inconsiderable number of informatives and conditions that we've placed on that. I will take a show of hands then for members to accept officer's recommendation with those informatives and conditions added. I'll take a physical show of hands if I may, please. You happy there, Mrs. Armour? And members against? And 3 against. So that, members, is carried. And thank you very, very much for a very good, very in-depth debate. Okay. That concludes the business for the evening. The one agenda item and a weighted one too. Can everyone please remain in the Zoom meeting until we've been advised that the live stream has stopped? I'd like to thank you all for your attendance this evening, and remember please to clean your own desk.